Hello, everyone. Welcome to the British History Channel with me, Philippa, and to our latest historian interview. If you've been here before, thank you for coming back. Thank you for your support. But if this is your first time, hello, a very warm welcome to you. If you love British history, you're definitely in the right place. Not only have I got today's episode for you, but you can go and click on the playlist, Historian Interviews, and you will find almost 50 interviews in there with eminent historians about topics you're going to find fascinating for you to enjoy at your leisure. You will also find some virtual tours, some mini history documentaries. If you want to keep in touch and find out what is going on, obviously you can subscribe to my YouTube channel at British History, click the bell icon and select all so that you get notifications when there is a new video. If you're listening on the podcast, please also subscribe to the British History podcast there. If you like Substack, then please come along and subscribe. You can subscribe for free to my newsletter on Substack, substack.com/at British History. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm really active on there at British_history_tours. There's a clue. I do tours. So if you're interested in touring with me, look at BritishHistoryTours.com. And you can also join me on Patreon. If just history online is your thing, patreon.com/British History. Okay, all the plugging over with. Today, I am going to be talking to Niall Devitt. He's a researcher and he's a writer. He specialises in the history of transport. He was raised in what he calls an underground family. I'm presuming he means a family that are interested in the underground. We're talking the London Underground here. He studied history for 5 years at King's College. He's a passionate advocate for public transport. Why not? He's a postgraduate researcher. He's written for publications such as Backtrack, Fabian Review, and History Today. He's also got his hands dirty. He's helped to restore a steam locomotive on the Bluebell Railway in Sussex, a locomotive called Camelot. And he is embarking on the first major complete history of the London Underground, beginning with the first of 4 planned books. First book covers the Victorian period. It's called Underground Railway, Crowded City, 1801 to 1902, and it will be published by Pen and Sword. So let's get on with it. Welcome, Niall. Thank you for joining me on the British History Channel today. Can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself before we begin?
Yes, certainly, pleasure. I come from a London transport family. My dad was on the Tube, West Londoner, Queen's Park Rangers fan. And basically, I think one of my first memories is going up with my mum, with my twin in the in the pram. I would say about 2.5 years old. And I don't know if you know East Acton Station, but it's a classic, actually, it's a classic Great Western station. It would look very appropriate in the countryside because the Great Western used to run the line out to part of the Underground run by another. You don't think it, Great Western. And anyway, it had these very, very steep stairs, double set of stairs, straight out, something Victorian almost. And I always remember a smell of ozone and disinfectant and coal tar. One of those. So if I smell this today,
you're about there.
I start wondering where the Farley's Rosks are gone. But anyway, I remember eventually there's no staff helping or anything. She managed to get the double buggy up. They said pram, wasn't buggies.
Yeah, there's no pneumatic tyres on those days.
No, they've got easy these days, man. This is my mum with, and we come to the top of the stairs and I can remember it was just a flash in my eye. And the next thing, a load of wheels going past. And this silver thing went past. What's that? And unfortunately, I've never been able to get rid of the addiction. I'm working on it. I get therapy, obviously, and that literally is one of my first memories. And from that, my dad was very there. I can remember another one was my dad going to, obviously, shift worker. One of the things, he was there in his those days, very smart, not like these days. They look like something out of Thunderbird. Black uniform, the beautiful roundel, which had an outline of the St. Paul's on it and things. It's very ornate. Anything London Transport, lovely design. I mean, you can see the Southgate roundel behind me, bullseye, as I like to call them. Beautiful. That's Edward Johnson. The typeface for that is from Trajan's Column. You can look at it. It's about the same.
Oh, wow.
The lettering. Oh, no, there's heritage. There's culture here. This has got legacy. But anyway, I can remember my father bearing down. Daniel's at one time at the end of the pram. I'm at the other. He's probably hitting me at that point or biting my toes or whatever, as you do as twins. And I can just remember my dad just kissing me like that, and the brim of the hat. So I had this roundel in my face. I talk about indoctrination, I think is the best way I would say it. And from I used to be terrified getting on the tube because I remember when I was old enough and we had a thing called a priv card. It was a little blue card. And it's a wonderful thing, the Prep card, because he gave you a discount. Families. One of the reasons to get people to do fairly unpleasant work often was that you had little perks. They were a good employer. They looked after the family. We used to get discounted tickets to go and see shows at the London Palladium and things like that. Oh, yeah, they looked after you, London Transport. You were a London Transport family. Canteen food, and the food was beautiful food, not canteen food. That sounds terrible. The best ingredients, their sausages, their bread. They used to make, down a place down Croydon, London Transport used to have an enormous facility. We used to make their own food. And they used to do Welsh rarebit, and the famous London Transport Christmas pudding. You used to order it in advance, and I've had it. And typically, there wasn't meant to be alcohol in it, but there was no, because that was Frank Pick. It's that kind of thing. But it was delicious. No fivepences in it or anything. And you could order it from the canteen at White City. But I was terrified getting on the train. And I'll explain why. Right. I don't know if you know the Central Line, but it's a bit of the Central Line where it turns underneath Shepherd's Bush, and it does a proper dog's leg because it's piecemeal construction on the cheap. As a result, the train goes, whoa, 1 minute, and the next minute, whoa. And then you suddenly descend into the dark. Apparently my sister, and she always likes to remind me of this, she says, oh, yeah, you go give me your learned expositions on the tube. You used to go green.
It sounds like a roller coaster.
Well, it is. Even to this day, it's quite lively. The other roller coaster is when you get on the tube at Hampstead, and it's the deepest station, but you are suddenly descending from the hills outside London of the Northern Heights down in, and there's no, the power, the driver doesn't, the train operator does not use the accelerator. It's braking.
Brake.
It's like going down in a mine, and you'll smell, what's that smell? That's brake blocks. And you'll always on the Northern. So I used to get very, very nervous, but out of fear comes love. So I'm told. I need to get a life. That's what I'm saying. So
I don't know there's any hope.
Well, I did history. You see, that's one thing I could do. And I'm not bad. I knew engineering and stuff, but I loved history full stop. You name it, from Roman, Tudor, and I did it. I was good at it, and did A level. Then went to King's London, which was like going to private school for the first time because I was state. But my God Almighty, they're a funny bunch. It's very old fashioned. It was a touch of high church to it, not like UCL, which is the radical high church. And we had we had our brilliant historian RJ had Lord, who's he can remember. And what they did teach you, though, was you had to do an essay a week, and it was the Oxford and Cambridge system personal tutorial. 1, they taught you how to gut a book. 2, they taught you how to research. If you didn't do the work, by the way, unlike most of it, they'd have you out. I used to always unfairly, I said to my sister and my brother went to NSC. I said, well, let's see Europe or Manana, as I used to say, which is unfair because, there was some very good people there. But they taught me how to research. And they would take, right, we're going down the queue. And what was it? Go and find something. It's not going to bite you. Go and find something. And these days, I mean, this is so important. What you're doing, Philippa, is so important. Everybody has a right to their history. Everybody has a right to the history of what they love, of their country. And here's the thing. The Kew National Archives is a fantastic service. It's not just about family trees. And what's wrong with that? I'm afraid I'm going to warn most of you, you're probably not related to Elizabeth I.
We do try and tell people, but someone's making a lot of money out there. Tell them.
I tried JP Morgan, but they didn't believe me. They told me to move on. But the thing is, they make it simple. So I was not frightened. And they taught you, right, okay, now that you've got one piece of file there. Yeah, but isn't there another file somewhere else? And what I did get was to look and draw a map. Right, I found something here. So when I was doing the research for the books, what happens with regard to underground history is that it's become very compartmentalized.
I was going to say, in archives, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because especially when, you wanted to, hopefully you need to uncover some new stuff, but
yes,
someone has to have already looked at it and catalogued it in that way. And you can't know what you're looking for because that's not the point.
That's right.
But you almost need to know what you're looking for to be able to find it.
It's like having a compass. Do a bit of primary reading. Try and avoid wiki if you can. You see, unless you've sado like me, unless you read it, you can say, well, that's rubbish.
Yeah, it all sounds very plausible until you know what you're talking about.
And I'm sure you get exactly the same as somebody's doing Jacobean history or Tudor or the Glorious Revolution. I mean, hey, here's the beautiful thing, though. A lot of the underground stuff, it's typed. I don't have to worry.
You haven't got to translate anything, at least, or handwriting.
I have got it easy compared to the Henricians and so on and so forth. But great training. On my dissertation, I did was on tube sheltering, the politics of tube sheltering in 2 world wars. first and second, because you don't know if you want to do properly what's going on the platform. You've got to know to look at the First World War.
So there were tube sheltering in the First World War as well, because I think
and that's something nobody does. But it sets a couple of parameters on why tube sheltering becomes extremely important, becomes a vignette of wartime London and wartime struggle in this country. Yet, I'll tell you something, I'm in for a shock. Only 14% of Londoners used it. So why is it important? We'll talk about that later. And there's a story there, because the thing is, I don't believe in shock and awe history. Most of the things about the underground is pretty good, but what you often take to be, and often the I wouldn't say the official version, is somewhat roseate at times. And that's not to say that they were struggling on the platform. No, most people got along and so on and so forth. I'm sorry, this is not going to be the spark if you're looking for it, that elusive spark. But nevertheless, for example, another one we'll talk about is recruitment of the first female driver. Well, yes, but there's something else that's got to go in there, because he doesn't change for 20 years. So, I mean, and now there's a name. We'll talk about that a little bit later. In other words, what I've chosen to do here is go back to basics and go and see, hey, we know the underground opened on the 10th of January, 1863. Right, fine. What did the other railway companies make of it?
Okay, well, let's go there then. So the underground, so what did you say there? It opens in 1863.
January 1863.
I always wanted to ask, whose idea was it? And linked to that, did the idea come before the technology to do it, or did the technology develop and therefore someone managed to have the idea? Or are these two things, are they linked?
Almost. You've got to ask yourself the question. There's a few things that are happening. We've lost the colonies in 1783. Okay, we recover basically when the British Empire gets bigger, and after we get rid of Boney, Britain has emerged as a great power, a great naval power, but also military power in its own place. In reflection of that, for the first time, a city, the first census is 1801. So you've got 1 million people, a city with 1 million people living in it. And this is again why an underground. 1801, 1 million people. Last time that was happened would be the first 2 centuries of under the Roman Empire in Rome. So this is extraordinary. Berlin is about a fifth of the size, and Paris is a third of the size of London. And that is a reflection upon the Industrial Revolution, good and bad, that could be said, but also it is becoming the capital of a great empire. As a consequence of which, London has always been the largest city going back to the Romans. After Boudicca sets fire to Colchester, it's going to be London. So that's the capital city. And from this point onwards, from the 1660s, the Romans had put roads in. They all centre on what place? Londinium. And there's two cities. There's the City of London and there's the City of Westminster. Oh, by the way, at this point, when I say to you Turnham Green is lovely place, good place for creameries. Oh. Chiswick, good place to make cheese, as in Chiswick. Fulham Palace Road, near where the Bishop of London lives, is where the first orchids are brought before they go to Kew Gardens. It's all countryside. Barnet Fair. There's a race course at Neasden. And the best horses, which will often for races for the Derby, are raised at Neasden. Neasden. It's a Viking name. And you have this the London we now see, when we see London, and because of that wonderful, seductive Beck map, we often see London as, if it ain't on the tube, it ain't London. And, I mean, what? High Barnet? Oh, no, there be monsters beyond High Barnet. You know, you don't go there. When we were doing in 1801, it's Village London. And I don't mean Hampstead Village, it is Village London. Shepherd's Bush. Did you know they were still keeping sheep before they weren't taken off for slaughter into London in the 1930s on Shepherd's Bush? They used to come up the Uxbridge Road. But massive.
So we're talking about
separate communities. But more people want to live in London. Now, the majority of people still live in central London. And don't forget, this is a London which has appalling crime, no clean water, indifferent food supplies, grave snatching going on. If you don't, not Birkenhead, one of the major things, if you look at the newspapers for the period, coffins which are anti-tamper proof, because there is a roaring trade going on into coffins. The number of people, because of the industrialization, the fact that this is a powerhouse country now, this is going to rule the world in the next, you could argue, for the next 18, 90 years, up to 1914. Millions of people start coming in. What also makes that feeds that are the canals. The Regent's Canal opens, and then you really do put petrol and a match on it, the railways turn up. Now, the railways are the dynamite, if you like, which is going to make London the city we know now today. When they arrived, the first is London and Greenwich, and it's very, people notice that One, it's cheaper than the stagecoaches you used to have to take to get to Greenwich. Or the river. Don't forget, the first great transport system in London is the Thames. And that's very important. They notice the railways turn up. It's cheaper. It's fast. Apart from the odd boiler explosion, it's go. And then suddenly the great mainline termini we know to this day, Euston, 1838.
Oh, really early, yeah.
Okay. But Stephenson's London and Birmingham Railway. The next one after that is Paddington, right, 1842. Now, 1840. Do you know there's a section at Paddington called the Lawn? And why is it called the Lawn? Because Paddington is Paddington Village. And the problem the Great Western has, and why the Underground is going to be useful, it's too far out. It's in the middle of bloody nowhere. It's in the sticks. Paddington is miles out. So as a result of which, to this day at Paddington, it's a thing called the Lawn. Because it was exactly that. It was a grass. Later stations, King's Cross, 1852. Beautiful. The King's Station is based on the riding school of the Tsar in St. Petersburg, the building. And this is a laissez-faire system. This free trade is coming in 1846. This is an uncontrolled laissez-faire. It is a free market system.
So you've got independent
totally
companies
independent.
creating these railways, creating the stations. So there's no combined plan here. There's no coordination. Right.
But early on, even in 1846, Gladstone turns around, and because there's been a railway boom, just like the South Sea bubble in 1850. And guess what? Just like we're having now with stock markets crashing and so on and so forth, loads of people buy shares in these railway companies, a lot of which are bogus. They have no intention of ever building a railway. Or you'll have a situation where three separate companies, are trying to do the same thing. That's why a lot of what Beeching does in the 1960s, like it or not, is trying to, why do you need 5 stations there? The most egregious example I can think of, the private laissez-faire approach. By 1900, I can identify 5 to 6 separate stations called around Shepherd's Bush Green. Oh, when you bung in top of that, you've got trolley buses, you've got trams and buses as well. That's what the Fessex system does. So they all arrive along the Euston Road, basically, what was called the New Road. The New Road is what now the Marylebone Road, Edgware Road, Marylebone Road, Euston Road. It's the first road bypass scheme in Britain. And it's built in the 1820s because already London is getting so big. The amount of road congestion is chronic. There's a wonderful predictions. You can't move. Can you imagine the worst traffic jam you can possibly think of, but with no traffic lights and all horse-drawn? And the problem with horse-drawn traffic, of course, it has had a byproduct.
Yeah.
So you're talking millions of tons put on the streets each day. And that's going into the watercourse because people are then having to move in the city. For example, a lot after the famine, a lot of Irish move out. Not only are they building the railways, they're having to move into very squalid situations. So get cholera breaks out. The number of soup kitchens, because people are, you've got the economic agricultural downturns and so on and so forth. If I've looked out the number of soup kitchens, there's a soup kitchen down, I think it's down in Camberwell, and it's serving 1,000 people a day. I mean, that shows you how poor people are. But you've got to sort out things. You've got traffic jams. The place stinks. You've got grave robbing going on. You've got no fresh water. Food supplies. Here's the problem. Before Smithfield, the big modern Smithfield market opens, they used to bring the cattle down, and they used to bring it down the Caledonian Road. Well, there's a stampede. Bringing cattle that was quite a problem. Stampedes of cattle coming because it's so dangerous. The railways, they've arrived here, and the railways are on the Euston Road, this new bypass. They're all potted along. They're all separate. They don't like each other. Classic example of that. If you want to see a massive you go yourself moment, is look at King's Cross Station, 1852, Cubic building, lovely tire. The Midland Railway had shared the tracks into London with the Great Northern Railway, and the Great Northern Railway started stiffing the Midland Railway. So the Midland Railway says, right, we'll get you lot back. They build their own line into St. Pancras. How big is St. Pancras Station? It towers over Euston. It's literally saying, yeah, who's the boss? And because the Midland Railway was a Midland Railway company, whereas the Great Northern Railway saw it as a London Railway company. And to this day, I always say, you can even see to this day, look at the different clocks. One clock is different to the other clock. They're all slightly different.
They were making sure they were standing out.
Making a statement.
Am I right in thinking that the Midland Railway was bringing the beer?
Absolutely. Oh, that's another thing. The railways are making things happen. You've got this massive city. You're making things happen. So fresh beer can be brought in, and the barrel, the structure at St. Pancras underneath, we've got the lovely shipping bit, and they've got the piano bar and the champagne. Look at the space between the stanchions for the roof. It's the distance of beer barrels.
Right.
So that's where they used to keep beer. Another thing, a Sardi Jew, a Jewish man down in Bow in 1860, comes up with a really good idea of how to feed people plentiful and make a nice little profit. And what's he need to do this? He needs seed potatoes, which are coming from Lincolnshire via the Great Northern Railway into King's Cross, into the goods yard. Oh, and the Great Eastern Railway, and they can also Billingsgate. The invention is fish and chips. In 60, the first fish and chip shop opens.
No.
That would have been impossible without the railways. Fish and chips is impossible without the railways.
So fish and chips starts in London, not on the coast or anything. No,
because you need to put seed potatoes together with white fish. So the first official noted is a Saudi Jewish man comes over from the pogroms, right? There's lots of poor people. I can provide them with a really nice, tasty meal, and it's nutritious, and it's affordable, and it's the railways make that possible. Your pint in your hand, or whatever, without the railways, it's not going to happen.
Wow. A pint of fish and chips, which is one of my favourite things.
I'm a vegetarian, but I do still bloody miss it. I do miss it.
How do you go past the chip shop with the smell and just go, no?
I do that. No, I'll tell you what I do. I'll sneak in, get a bag of chips, and it'll probably be a cheese and onion pasty. And then I'll just go, God, that
just have a big sniff.
That cod looks really nice. I tell you what I do miss, a bit of skate. Have you not had it? It's delicious. Irish speciality. It's gorgeous. It's very soft, very nice. It's very Dublin Ray, is it? No, my parents were from Dublin. They came a classic London transport, come and work in London. But anyway, there's a problem. The railways have turned up. They've all got to talk to each other. People, if you want to change trains, say from Paddington, as far as people are concerned, is out in the bloody countryside.
All right.
So that is miles out. There's another problem. The railways, when they come into London, are immensely destructive. To build a railway, now the canals are pretty bad. Build a railway. And one of the greatest depictions of that is in Charles Dickens' Dombey and Son, where it depicts the earth being rent asunder by the progress of the rail up Camden into use, what will become Euston Station, and the destruction. And he describes like an army of ants, of Irish navvies walking around doing it. Very dangerous work. Now, the problem is, if you were to let the railways, in Europe, you've got autocratic monitors, the occasional light and despot, but ultimately, I'm king. We are developing after 1688 a representative democracy, the great progress. As a consequence of which, NIMBYism points out, if you go to Amsterdam, if you go to Berlin today, Hauptbahnhof, one central station. Now, logically and sensibly, if all the railways went to one station, be a lot easier, wouldn't it? No way is that going to happen. So in 1845, a law is passed which says the railways cannot come into central London. They're banned. And you cannot build into central London, the big termini. So if you look to this day, like the Circle Line, see where the stations are going round. St Pancras, Euston, Liverpool Street, all on the edge of London, not in the centre. Absolutely forbidden. Oh, and by the way, because the railways have been behaving so badly and you've had this financial bubble, Gladstone threatens them with nationalisation. In 1846, as Chancellor of Board of Trade, he actually threatens with nationalisation.
Would that have been one of the first industries to be nationalised then?
It would have been. It would have been. But he gives them such a threat because they're behaving so badly. They're a lousy service, but also they're dangerous. I mean, there's no regulation. So the Board of Trade from that point onwards, for example, for the third class, very kind of them, they put a roof on finally. Up to that point, you were standing, if you were third class, you were standing with no roof. So the rain's coming down on you. Or the worst thing, there's an accident on the Great Western Railway, which is a broad gauge line. Brunel, very briefly, the rails we have today were designed 4 for 8.5 inches. It's the same system we have today. Were taken from colliery lines by George Stephenson. Thinks to himself, let's go large. He doubles it, basically. He makes it 7 foot. And he produces the first high-speed railway, London to Bristol, and it's a billiard table. It's no level crossing, and does he go around a mountain or valley? No, he goes through it. So it's bloody expensive to build, but it's magnificent. The greatest work in Britain is described by. The gauge is 7 foot. Now, the problem is he's come in a bit late in the day, so already there's too much, as he calls it, built to the colliery gauge, what the system we have now. If Brunel had got it, he's too late because there's too much of the other system, what's called the Northerners, the Liverpool men, all the Northerners. I'm not bloody ripping that up. No, not happening. Who's that bloody Frenchman? Who's that bloody Frenchman? What's he want? It's too late. 7 foot. right? But think about it. Think about the high-speed potential of that railway if it had been built completely. But anyway, getting back. Third-class passengers are on the Great Western Railway at Sonning, and there's a landslip. Just before on Christmas Eve, the land comes down, the train is derailed. And another train, because there's no proper signals, you used to have policemen standing to control the train saying, right, I think it's gone, now you go. There's no proper signalling. So literally policemen with a flag would say, now you can go. What's called the interval time service. That is the signalling. There's nothing signal, red light, or a semaphore to say which way. But anyway, another train slams into it. And the really horrible thing, the third-class passengers are catapulted out of the coach because there's no roof. So Gladstone is trying to bring a modicum of sanity to what has gone on. He does not want to see central London destroyed by, unlike Europe, in Berlin, the Kaiser says, Wilhelm I, we are having it. Right. Big station. You can see if you go to Berlin now. If you go to Amsterdam, central station, one central station. Right. So now that's very good. Hampstead's happy because it hasn't lost its gardens, Primrose Hill. Well, how the hell are you going to get between the stations? Now, in 1829, a man called George Schillerber has come up with a wonderful radical idea called an omnibus. It's horse-drawn and it runs along the new road. And what its job is, later on what it will do, goes bankrupt, by the way, because it's almost like a black cab. It's actually quite expensive for the first bus, but it's horse-drawn and it runs along Baker Street. Later on, people use buses, the omnibus, meaning for all. It's the only way you can get between the different terminals. If you want to change, let's say you need to change between Paddington and Euston these days, you jump on the circle or whatever, then you have to get in a horse bus. And that's the only way you can link King's Cross with Paddington, say. Guess what? We've already got problems with congestion. It gets worse because you've got thousands, millions of people turning up in London a year, and they all want to they want to complete their journey. So they're all getting the buses. Fleet Street, there's one picture from Fleet Street, from the offices of the Times, from the editor. And he said the last time something like this was Babylon, to have this chaos. And he said it looks like a Turkish bazaar. There are people, the traffic's so bad, people are going from coach to coach trying to sell them things. And, pretty bad. Getting around London is difficult. Things are getting better, though. One, grave robbing stopped. I mean, this is the point. The Victorian way of death is invented during this period. This is where the 5 great graveyards of London are basically come up, which is Kensal Green and Highgate. Up to that point, what they're having to do is take existing graves, chuck some lime down on top and put a person on top. Now, the problem with that, of course, is there are many, many recorded cases of finding where a dog will come in with a tibia. So the dog, it's bad, and the smell, right? So eventually, Victorian decency and progress, the conception of Victorian progress, sorts the bloody mess out. And so you get the great graveyards and the Victorian way of death. And they open a station at Waterloo called the Necropolis Railway Company. And its job is to take coffins for the people and transport them with dignity in a coffin train down to Brookwood, which is one of the great cemeteries, overfilled cemeteries of London. It's called the Necropolis Railway. The building was still there, and it was only destroyed by the Rough Fire in 1940. Very Victorian, that. And there is one other person who makes it possible, is London is getting a bit better. Bazalgette. Now, without Bazalgette, you don't get fresh running water. The system of sewers, which he introduced, all the pumping stuff, still works to this day. And from that moment, after the Great Stink, you remember heard of the Great Stink, 1853, when London, so bad, so disgusting, you wouldn't believe. Everything is in. There's dead corpses. They're pulling fishing bodies out of the water. And, it's disgusting. And the smell is so bad that it's commented upon in America. But, thank God we left and went to Boston, this lot of savages. So anyway, Basildon, although typical, like anybody's trying to endeavour on anything, he is completely, totally pulled to pieces in the presses. What a terrible waste of money. And he saves millions of lives. Well, Bazalgette, wonderful man. Right, why am I talking about these things? If you can sort out your grave robbing, if you can sort out your food, if you can sort out, getting a decent pint of beer in the evening, if you can pull out fresh running water, why can't you sort out your railways, your transport in London? And that's where a man called Charles Pearson, he's a solicitor, works in the City of London. And he's a very modern man. He's an extraordinary character. He works for the Metropolitan Corporation of London. And if you look at his CV, he's amazing. He believes in women's suffrage in 1850s. Very unusual. He's against the death penalty. He believes in working. All people should have the vote. He believes in redistribution, just making the poor also have a stake in society. I mean, He's a mad Marxist. He's actually high church, but he's an extraordinary figure. And he comes up with this idea: what if we dig up the road, put bricks down the side, and put a railway down the middle, and we'll do the railway along the route of that bypass what we went and built recently? People go, what's this about? You know, and he starts the idea. This has been bubbling around. Robert Stevenson, the great Robert Stevenson, had thought of extending a line from Euston all the way into the city of London, because that's where your stockbrokers are trying to get to. Your lawyers who are going to head down to the Temple, they need to get to the city of London. 1854, he sets up a company, the North Metropolitan Railway Company. It fails. It's in the middle of the Crimean War. That's the other thing. Every time you're building an underground line, you've always got to see what's going on in the rest of the world. It's like a jelly on a plate. It gets affected by what's going on around it. So 1854, right? Just in the, season festivals going on at this point. And it doesn't make there's not enough people who are interested. And it will run from roughly, let's say Farringdon to Paddington Edgware Road. Eventually, the Great Western Railway gives them £75,000 to make sure it gets built. And the idea is what we call cut and cover. There's two types of underground. I'm going to talk about the deeper ones in a second. Cut and cover. Literally, you make a trench, dig up the road, make a trench, put bricks down it, put the track down, and then put the road back on top. Now, that is what we call cut and cover. And the lines that are cut and cover to this day are the Circle, the Hammersmith City, although a lot of that's on viaduct. It's that simple. Now, great idea.
So they're quite shallow then.
Absolutely. Right. They're just basically below about less than 30 feet or 40 feet below the surface. And you can see that if you go to a station, say, like Euston Square, the original name is Gower Street, near the UCL. And if you go down, you can get down there by steps. Now, I'm going to ask you, great, now you've just built a railway. What do you think the problems of running an underground railway? You built your railway, it's already, what you think your problems might be?
Because we're still talking steam locomotives pulling carriages now.
Bullseye, got it.
So it's going to be incredibly smoky, dirty.
Filthy.
I imagine breathing is going to be a bit of an issue.
It's going to be fun. Absolutely, you got it. Well, first and foremost, it's incredibly destructive, digging all that road up. You are seriously going to annoy people. And, okay, so when they're building the line near Gower Street, a row of gardens and half of it collapse into the working.
I was going to ask if they had the technology to do this. It sounds like quite a big undertaking to reinstate it and make sure it doesn't.
If you can imagine going in the back of your television and ripping all the wires out or the thing, and then hoping to put it all back together again afterwards.
Yeah.
Or the plumbing. I'm not suggesting you do this tonight. Go and have a look under the sink. Let's unplug the dishwasher. Let's take the dryer out, and then put it back together. It's going to be a bit of a mess, or it's going to be difficult. So the buildings collapse. Classic. Around it, it's great because they can see. It's quite amusing in hindsight, but it wasn't bloody funny when it happened. They could see sand suddenly disappear. They could see the pavement suddenly disappearing. And the next bit, a load of sand. And the next thing, thank God nobody was there. So it is distracting. But you're absolutely right. Getting that our problem. Now, they're very clever, the Victorians. They always come up with an invention for some things. And I'm not talking about just children climbing, running between wheels and climbing chimneys or whatever. But they are inventive lot. I mean, if you look at, I think it's like 98% or something of the patented inventions all come from Britain. It's something like that to this day. It's actually a very inventive country. Anyway, they come up with this idea. And I want you to think Olympic swimmer. All right, Mark Spitz, we've got Olympic swimmer. What they come up with is a thing called condensing. Now, what it is very simple. When an Olympic swimmer dives in, got the head in, they come up and they hold their breath, don't they? Take a gasp of water, air, and then go under, right? What a steam locomotive you can do, when it's running in the tunnels, instead of getting the steam to go up the chimney, you divert the steam into the side tanks where the water is kept, because you need the water to boil, make steam. It's called a condensing locomotive. And it's invented by a man called John Fowler. John Fowler's a bit of he's the civil engineer for the underground, by the way. But and like most civil engineers, he's a rotten mechanical engineer. Brunel is a great civil engineer. He is the worst mechanical engineer you could ever possibly think of. He couldn't design a locomotive. The engines for the ships he builds are rotten. He's a great civil engineer, but, Brunel can do anything. No, he's hopeless. He gets a very good old-fashioned Northumbrian who'd knew George Stephenson, called the brilliant Daniel Gooch. And you won't have probably heard of Daniel Gooch. Daniel Gooch saves the Great Western because they let Brunel design all the locomotives for the Bruno Great Western, and guess what? None of them bloody work. So they get seriously no nonsense. Newcastle man comes down, sits down, and he designs engines that work. John Fowler is a rotten engineer. He's a great rotten mechanical engineer, but a marvelous civil engineer. He designs the underground. But he does have one clever thing, which is the condenser. So think of it like an Olympic swimmer. What it does, when it's in the open sections, because there are sections of the line which are open, it pops up, takes a breath of fresh air, so the engine, and then into the tunnel, and putting the steam into its tunnels. Now, there's only a problem with that. The water in the tanks heats up.
Yes.
And you need cold water for a steam engine because a thing called an injector. It's got to be cold water. It's a trick of physics, but it's very clever. Basically, you inject water into the boiler against pressure. Because it's like a balloon. How do you get into a balloon which is already pressured? But to do this trick of physics, you need cold water. And the pumps, what's called an injector, the pumps for these periods aren't that reliable. So the problem is, he also thinks, apart from the condenser, John Fowler, he comes up with an idea for what we call the fire-brick locomotive. Now, doesn't that sound exciting? What happens? It was a good idea on paper. The idea is you've got hot bricks. You have them, you make them red, white hot using a fire, normal coal, or coke. We've coke at this point. And join that is then used to, in the tunnels, make the steam. Right. Now, if a steam engine has problems, and it can happen, on a conventional steam locomotive, you can chuck the fire out. You can chuck it out if something happens. You've got safety valves and things called lead plugs, so it doesn't explode. Well, because a steam engine, a pressure vessel, is a potential bomb. That's something we often forget. That's why, playing with steam engine. No, that's why the preserve railways have to take it very seriously. These are they are potential bombs if they're not properly maintained. Well, the problem with fire, if a steam engine gets into trouble, the injectors, you can't get water into the boiler. Fowler's engine you can't stop the heat. You can't turn off hot red bricks. So it continues to generate water, generate steam.
Okay.
It continues. And if you've got no water in that boiler, it's going to make the boiler explode. His solution, one of his solutions, although perfected by that great man, the Northumbrian Daniel Gooch, is the condenser. The other one isn't such a good idea because if you can't control the heat, it's not going to stop. You can't suddenly say to a brick, at least with a coal fire in a locomotive or a coke fire, you can check it out. Fire bricks, turn off, stop being hot. No, in other words, potentially. So it doesn't work. But again, the Metropolitan Railway has struggled to make ends meet. Charles Pearson has approached the Great Western and they bailed them out with £75,000 worth of money to get it built and to get it running. The Metropolitan Railway can't afford operate its own trains at this point. So approach the Great Western. The Great Western says, all right, we'll do it for you. We will operate for you. Now, what is often forgotten in what I would call the kind of official underground history, the first underground railway is not operated by the Metropolitan Railway. The concession, if you like, the franchise, like privatised railways now, it's the Great Western Railway operating. And it's broad gauge trains. The first underground railway has broad gauge trains, not like little ones we have now compared. Remember the 7 foot? Broad gauge. It's great. It's Brunel's train to size is running the first train. And the line from Edgware Road to Farringdon and later down to Hammersmith is broad gauge. To this day, if you go to Goldhawk Road or Shepherd's Bush and look down the viaduct, you'll see there's a big gap in between the two tracks, east, southbound, westbound, northbound, because once upon a time, you had to fit 2 7-foot tracks. So anyway, all is going for the railway opens 10th of January. There's been a big banquet, proper classic Victorian proverbial. They're all drunk. Metropolitan Police Band plays, but it's fascinating. John Fowler is going, this is a great Victorian endeavour. They're all drunk. And it's fascinating. Daniel Gooch isn't there. Because John Fowler would be saying, well, these new locomotives that the Great Western introduced, I gave them some advice. So he's damning Daniel Gooch with faint praise. Another person who's not there is Lord Palmerston. Now, he's the Prime Minister. And this is a great undertaking. This is a big event. The capital of the world. He's not there. Well, at this point, Lord Palmerston had been attending what's called the Scotch Church, Presbyterian fire-breathing church in Covent Garden. And there's a Dr. Cummings. Now, you must look at Dr. Cummings. He's a great guy. I'll give you the list of things he hates. All papists, the Irish, Freemasons. Yeah. Oh, he might have been one himself. I'll take that back. The French. Particular loathing of the French. And railways. And the worst thing of all, underground railways. That is the path to damnation. You are tampering with Hades. That the devil will burst through. It's proper.
Okay.
So, Presbyterianism. And Palmerston goes. And it's very noticed that Palmerston's not there for the underground. Gladstone had a little ride in it. And Gladstone gets very interested in underground railways. We'll talk about later. Now, anyway, it opens. And guess what? It's smoked out. It's choked out. People have to be taken to University College London because so many people want to travel on this new sensation. 38,000 people turn up. The queues are out down the road when the station's open. They go and have a cry on this underground. At the time that the English Civil War is going on, not English, so the American Civil War is going on, it's reported in the Richmond newspapers in the Confederacy. Even though, Lincoln is just about to have his emancipation address, a turning point in the American Civil War, the front page of the Richmond Observer, once they can get the message over past the blockade, is there's an underground railway in London. The Age in Sydney, in Australia, says there's an underground railway.
We're so used to the idea. But if
Sensation.
no one's ever done it before, it must have been just so... Because really, I'm thinking, goodness me, I just stayed away. It sounds way too dangerous. Like, let everyone else have a go on it first. But you haven't.
Yeah,
You've got... Because
I don't blame you. Yeah.
Because it's a novelty, you've got people obviously wanting to see, well, what does presumably, what does it look like?
Yeah. To travel under the earth. And it's quite unnerving. We'll go back into ancient mythology. It's crossing the Styx and giving your penny to go into Dido and there's Dido in Hades, poor thing, rotten boyfriend. And it's unnatural. It's deep wilderness, subterranean, in the earth, where the dead are, where the worms are, where decay, where evil resides, the devil. And there you're going underneath the ground. Yeah. Guess what? Those 38,000 people, they have to put on extra trains. Not all of them are condenser fitted, and they are carrying the staff to University College London because they've all got carbon monoxide. What would be now known as carbon monoxide problem. Everybody's coming off with headaches.
Yes.
But it's open. It's open.
And does it stay open? Does it remain open? Does it ever have to close?
Well, possibly the war, but we'll talk about that. Listen to it opens. And it works. And naturally people say, well, we could extend all this. But then again, you get into classic NIMBYism. They've seen what has happened along the Euston Road, and getting the section down from Bayswater, that's the western section of the yellow circle line, down to, obviously place to go would be the new Victoria station. Or along the embankment. Basil Jett is building the embankments as we know it. He's going to push the Thames back, and then he's going to put his big sewers down to get fresh water. So the idea is we could put a railway alongside it. What we now know is the main line of the district railway, the district line, basically from Victoria out to Temple, Blackfriars, and again connecting with the City of London. But NIMBYism. When they start to go around places like Bayswater, oh no, not in our backyard. So as a result of which, the Metropolitan Railway has to disguise near Bayswater, just up the Leinster Road, Leinster Street. You will pass what is a very beautiful, a classic, I would say, early Regency Square with a line of good, fine townhouses. These places, you could see where the servants' quarters and stuff. And you pass one particular fine example of this. And if you go up and try to put a letter through the door, a flyer or whatever, go and have a go. They're a facade. They look like
I've heard of these. Do they feature in films sometimes as well?
Some people send you as a joke to an address. And they're very good because they have to be identical. But it's an early example of NIMBYism. The other problem is that the people building these railways are navvies, often Irish. Payday's Friday. And payday and Friday with the navvies is keep out of central London. They'll be killing each other.
It's fish and chips and beer night.
It's the towns. It's a bit like the fleets in town. The navvies all descend from the weekend, got their money, etc. Hard work, hard living, hard drinking. So as a result, the classic one was they were building up in Clapton, the sheriffs. There's a riot. They throw the policemen into the River Lee. Another one is there's a riot. This is also a time of Chartist agitation. So you've got things are quite febrile in London, and the authorities are getting very frightened of the masses. Pitch battles between navvies down in Pimlico and stuff, and people go, God, lock your doors, keep them out. It's Friday night. They're going to be on the proverbial. So the railway's becoming more and more difficult to build in central London, but more people are coming into London, so the congestion's getting worse. Now somebody suggests, and there's an organizer that says, look, even the Church of England has managed to provide extra Gothic churches because we don't want to be godless. They can provide extra facilities. Surely we can get. This is about 1864. Could we not sort this out and perhaps get them all to work together and bang their heads together? And that's the first, what we would now call, idea. Another wild idea. Instead of competing about the railways, why don't you get the buses to work with the underground? Now, we can't have that because it's laissez-faire competition, all that stuff. But somebody's saying, now this is nuts. Why don't You could use one ticket on the bus and use one ticket on the underground. That's 1864. We would now call that a plea for integrated transport. Or what Frank Pick will later, the great Frank Pick will later call from pavement to platform. Seamless, right? 64. But you've still got this problem. You can't get into central zone. You can't build a railway down to Trafalgar Square. So what's the solution? Well, I'm going to tell you. Can you imagine, Philippa, standing in Trafalgar Square 56 million years ago? Because that's your solution. Well, right, that's your solution. It's a bit of a rough neighbourhood. Right, you've got giant flightless birds. They can crack your head open. They're the top predator. Mother Earth is repairing. It's only 10 million years ago since the dinosaurs because the meteorite have died out. So you've got crocodiles. You've got tiny horses. And the crocodiles like to eat those. So they've got a terrestrial crocodile, which you can imagine a crocodile, big one, about 3 times the size of the ones we have now, with legs, which can go hunt. You've got giant birds. It's the temperature. If you can imagine going for Sri Lanka or the Indian Ocean and a nice beach, palm trees, mangoes, coconuts, that's the neighbourhood. And don't get in the water, the sharks. Okay. That's when it all dies out and Mother Nature moves on. It's down in layers and it produces blue clay. Lots and lots of it. About 100 feet of it, or 50 to 100 feet of it. And it's, Play-Doh. Do you remember Play-Doh? The perfect tunnelling material. It's a doddle to cut through. It's actually called blue clay, but actually if you dig it out, in about an hour or so, this clay goes brown. And inside it, when they're building the underground, they're always finding, oh, look, mammoth tusk and mango
Another one.
Another one. Oh, yeah, there's loads. Used to, when they were south of the Thames, because it's a different strata, they found plesiosaurs when they were building the Victoria. But that is the strata. 56 million years, a rough neighbourhood. But when it all settles down and the water flows over, it produces the absolutely ideal tunnelling material. Now, look at the case of Moscow. You've got frozen ice, quicksand, granite. New York, granite to dig through. And the rest of London, south of the Thames, by the way, if you look at a tube map to this day, you'll notice most of the underground is north of the Thames. Well, that isn't just an accident. That's an accident of geography. It's the fact that where their blue clay is, it's so much easier to dig through it. Now, you've got to find a way of digging through it. Now, again, we're going to have to talk about the Brunels. People go on about Isambard with the top hat, and there is greatness in him, 5'9". He's got the vision thing. He comes up, oh, we could do that. Never delivers a project on time, and God doesn't hear shaft his shareholders. But his dad, quite mad, always in debt. He ended up in a debtor's prison. That's why Brunel Isambard takes on so many contracts, because the whole family had ended up in a jail. But one day, when he's walking out, he gets a contract in Portsmouth Dockyard. And although it's a bit apocryphal, he looks at wooden worms, mollusks, which dig into the wood. And it's a problem in the Navy. And it produces it's got circular teeth. What it does, it eats the wood, and then what's left of it, using its teeth, like that, and then expels what's out the back. So Brunel thinks to himself, we've got big traffic jams on the south bank of the Thames at Rotherhithe. There's only one real bridge at this point, bear in mind. Constable is the new bridge is Waterloo Bridge, named after the Battle of Waterloo. But the only place you can cross, there's nowhere to cross from the south to the north bank of the Thames. So you could have the situation, you could have goods come from the Empire or from America, and they would wait longer on the south bank of the Thames to cross over into London than they would for the transit of the Atlantic. You could have, that mad. So, and there has been a proposal. First person to have a go at building a tunnel is our 7-foot Cornishman, Richard Trevithick. And he comes up with a tunnelling shield. And if you could imagine, what tunnelling shield does this. You push forward, you dig it out, put the brick up, or you put an arch in or put a ring in, and then push forward again using jacks, and on and on. So you take a bit out, push it in, put a bit of tunnelling in. So Mark Brunel's looked at this mollusk, which is eating holes in the bottom of the Royal Navy. Hang on, that's not bad idea. So what we'll do, I'll make it using workmen. And instead of Trevithick's, it's much bigger. It's 40 square foot, each with a cell, with a workman who will dig it out. Then the person behind them will put in the tunnel or put the brickwork in, and so on and so forth. And that way, slowly but surely, you can inch forward under the Thames.
We're literally talking sort of a length of brick each time. They're literally just coming in behind.
Cut a bit out, and the frame, the tunnelling shield or frame, holds back the earth, and then you put the brick in, you let the brick dry, and that will hold back what's behind it. And that is the principle of how you build a tube tunnel. Now, there's only one problem. As most Brunel projects. If you're an investor, keep well clear, you are going to get stiffed. It takes from 1827. Company goes bust quite regularly. The tunnel, Thames Tunnel contract. The Thames breaks in frequently because they built it in the wrong bloody place. And what happens is it takes from 1827 and is only finished in 1843. Right. Not another one of those Brunel projects. Most of Brunel's projects are finished after his death. But anyway, this is shareholders beware. But he's still brilliant, but you can overdo it on Brunel. He gets a lot of things wrong. There's a whole list of things that go
He hit the marketing with the hat. That's what he did.
And the cigars,
Yeah.
Apparently he was charming, though. That was the other thing. He was fantastic to his family. Lots of tricks. You know about the story where he gets the sixpence down his windpipe? You know about that?
No.
He's doing conjuring tricks for his children. And he's and he knocks up and the sixpence goes down his windpipe.
Okay.
So, oh my God, he's choking. And they turn him upside down and they won't come up. And Brunel, although he's make that sketches a sorts to put down his throat and pull it out. He's choking to death. He's to put him down. He can still breathe a bit. And he sketches, could you make that, please, a forceps? And to this day, it's known as a Brunel's forceps. I mean, it's pretty special, Brunel. I mean, he really is clever. And he manages to get the sixpence out.
He's lucky. As a registered first aider, I can tell you that.
I know, but there's no first aid at this point. This is no National Health Service at this point.
He'd still be compos mentis. Wow. Anyway, yes.
But a man great under pressure, he gets it out. Now, we get back to our blue clay situation. Blue clay, right. Perfect timing when he said, God loves London. I'm telling you, he says, when Boomer God was sitting there going, I'm getting bored with the dinosaurs, we'll try something new. Boomer God goes, right, okay. London, what's this London thing? We'll give them the blue clay. It's the perfect tunnel material. In 1870, you bear in mind, you can't build, people don't want more of these cut and cover railways, the shallow ones. They're destructive, lots of NIMBYs, and they're getting organised. It's got to go around the edge. And there's even a law says you can't come into central London. 70. And it's a real fun, this, because I found a newspaper cutting. A couple of days, a year after the Metropolitan opens, there's what we call cut and cover mania. And lots of schemes. Most of them are never going to happen. But one of them, amidst all this, we're going to build a loo line. There was going to be a line, for example, from Gower Street, Euston Square, down to Portland, down to Oxford Street. That doesn't happen. No chance. You're going through Regent's Park. No way. It's royal land. Don't even think about it. But in this report from Parliament, which is going through all the railway bills, there's this strange thing called the Tower Subway is open, and it's a little line down in South which crosses from one bank of the Thames to the other. And a man called James Greathead has come up with a really good idea. He's taken Brunel's original tunnelling shield, but he's circular. And what it does, it's more powerful, it has jacks, which push against the clay. You cut it out and it cuts like that, like you'll squeeze, like a
corkscrew. Mm-hmm.
That's your thing, like a corkscrew. And it takes the blue clay, people there, and then you put tunnel rings, which you bolt together. It's about 10 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot in diameter, nothing big. And they put a little carriage in it and they pull it using a stationary boiler and a steam pulley, and pull it along. You pay a tiny penny. Bear in mind, still crossing the Thames. It's problematic. We haven't got all the bridges yet. And from that, do you remember, London is a very fortunate city. Why London? I said, going back to what we were saying. Think the echo scene. Think of the blue clay. Think of the flightless birds. The blue clay is laid down. Brunel, right? We do a tunnelling shield. 3. People saying, well, can't we find a solution to this? People are prepared to look up. James Greathead comes up with a tunnelling shield. All these things are coming together. And there's another real diamond. Another problem we've got to deal with. Do you remember it was bad on the cutting covers, the shallow ones? Do you think it would be a good idea to use steam locomotives down in the deep level? It's not going to happen, is it? So you've got to find a power source, a motive power. And the first idea is pneumatic rev. Literally, like a dart. You create a vacuum, and because you've created a vacuum, it pulls the coach along. Well, Brunel has come up with a scheme like that, and he equips the whole railway, the South Devon Railway, with a pneumatic scheme. And the pneumatic scheme is not a bad idea. Very fast, very light, smokeless system. And everybody goes, that's very good. Brunel, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And you can even operate up really steep gradients because it's so powerful. Problem is, all the leather seals, which are used between the sections of track, are eaten by rats. So as a result of it, this is South Devon. So even to this day, when you're travelling on the Great Western down to Devon, the trains labour up these really steep gradients because they were originally built for what's called atmospheric railways. Anyway, in South London, in a hill, just near the Crystal Palace, where the Crystal Palace is going to be re-erected, somebody comes up with invites all the engineers of the world to come and have a look at this demonstration railway. And it's a pneumatic railway. And creates attractive. It's a broad gauge carriage. People can travel it, and it sucks the train along at very fast speed. Now, it's a technological dead end in the end, because the practical things like rats eating seals are going to be a problem. The materials are not there yet. They haven't got. The idea is not a bad idea, but you just haven't got the materials quite yet, right? So that doesn't quite work. The next idea is, how about cable working? Now, cable working is fascinating. San Francisco to this day has a cable cars, doesn't it? Right? And what it is, you have a stationary engine at each end, and it pulls a continuous rope to which the cable car attaches itself and then is pulled along. It still works in San Francisco. The Glasgow subway, which is an underground line, until 1935 used cable working. Now, the Underground Railways, but for the fact of what the mid-Victorian Great Depression, which lasts basically from the 1870 onward for about 20-odd years, badly affects the money available to build more underground lines. If the Great Depression had not have happened, it is questionable whether the electric tube system would have emerged. It would be more likely to have been a cable work system. And if you look at the early plans for the tube lines we all love and know to this day, they're often cable worked first. Then a very, very, very important thing happens. In Berlin in 1879, Siemens brother has a wonderful toy train which goes round in a circle, and it's run by electricity. Now, people travel on it. And now, what's this? It's electric. It's a steam engine. Oh, watch this. It's very clever. It picks up its power from a railway alongside. And it's a toy train. It's actually preserved in the German Technical Museum. And that is the first electric locomotive. In 79, it's a circus attraction almost, but it shows it works. 1880s, mid-80s, the first practical electric lines are starting to emerge. Currently, in Northern Ireland is one place. Or, to this day, you can have the pleasure of travelling on the Folks Electric Railway at Brighton, which is one of the very, very earliest trains. Still open, well worth updating. It's really early electric. So what's happening, Philippa, is you're having blue plate. Well, you can thank the gods for that. Tunneling shields are coming together. Greathead has got a circular tunneling thing which cuts it away, and you can put iron rings, and then bung the magic ingredient on top of that, electricity. And you have the potential to solve your problem that you can't get railways into under. You don't build on the top of just under the earth. You go deep. And the first one to open, of course, is, as I'm sure, with one of those ladybird moments, the City and South London. And that opens up. And it's quite an event. I'm going to go the etc. It's quite an event, because what happens is originally Queen Victoria was actually going to come along and have a look at it. But she's got a bad cold that day, and she's also getting on. This is in 1890. So the Prince of Wales comes along, and it's a big event. And it's at Stockwell. The line runs from Stockwell up to King William Street, which is in the City of London, again, City of London. And it opens. The Prince of Wales has a fantastic time. He's very interested in inventions. He likes railways. So the first one, the city opens on the 4th of November, 1890. The public are allowed to travel on the 18th of December, 1890. So it finally opens to the public. And it's a very interesting thing. It's known as often the pioneer railway, the absolute moment when it all opens up. But the coaches have no windows in them. The little locomotives struggle often to get up the gradients. In fact, the lights inside the coach dim as the engine is taking all the power. These are tiny little engines. They look like Queen Anne cabinets, two of them put together. They should be in the front room in the Victorian parlour, but they're early locomotives. And it works. There's one thing which is very unusual for this period. When the Metropolitan Railway opened, you've got three classes. This is classic Victorian segregation, class apartheid almost. So on when the Metropolitan Railway, the fares vary from 3p to 6p, and all three classes and workmen's tickets are provided. The City in South London does something very radical. It's classless. It's one class. It's a set fare. And that comes from America and the streetcars. The first trams have turned up in London in 1870. And that's revolutionary. So you have this situation where coming up from Kennington, you could have a man, a lawyer or a stockbroker heading to the city with his top hat on, and he could be sitting next to a workman on the benches on what are delightfully known as padded cells. They're known as padded cells because there's no windows. Well, people not unreasonably think, why the hell would you
Why
want
do you need a window?
Well, you need a window. It's pretty basic. But the most radical thing is it's one class. And instead of having compartments where you can put your copy of from 1850, Daily Telegraph or the Times, we all to this day, you can ignore each other in, what is the greatest fear an Englishman has is somebody talking in a railway compartment.
Small talk, yeah.
Yeah, oh my God. So anyway, they're all having to meet each other on the underground of this new thing called the City in South London. And then slowly, now it's a pretty basic thing. It's almost like a tramway under the ground. Wants to be completely rebuilt in the 90s to make the tunnels bigger so they could take larger trains, more modern trains. But it works and it gets slowly extended. Then another line called the Waterloo and City, which is delightfully known as the Drain. And a mainline railway company gets involved. They think, and what they want to do, because Waterloo, bear in mind, remember you couldn't build you had to be on the outskirts of London. Waterloo is over the side in Lambeth, over the Thames in Lambeth. That's a hell of a distance from the City of London. So the London South Western Railway gets, what if we build one of these new tube thingies, tubular railways, they call them, don't they? Tubular railway. And the Waterloo and City line is built. And what's that job? It only has one stop, Waterloo to Bank. That's all it does. And it's known as the Drain because it was wet and it smelt.
Are these popular with the public from the beginning? They're not...
It takes a little bit of time because you've absolutely so, because that comes into another issue later on. A lot of people, what I would describe, even to this day, have what I would describe as tube phobia.
Yeah, I know people who won't ride the tube.
Not get on the tube. Like, wow. Yeah. So, and tube phobia is, well, think about it. You are asking people to travel in a flickering lighted train next to people. And this is a period where hot running water and underarm deodorant is still quite a special commodity for a lot of Londoners.
Not everyone uses it now, even though it's available.
But you'd be surprised. But in the Victorian period, you're talking 1890s here, and people coming from Billing, one of the big complaints of the underground Metropolitan Railway is that all the porters from Billingsgate Market are taking fish heads and entrails back with them into the compartments. So it's smelly. The lights flicker. I mean, who in their right mind would want to descend 90 foot into the ground, get into next to a complete bunch of strangers who smell, and in a tin can as it flickers through the bowels of the city.
Land of Hades.
The land of Hades. It's unnatural. It's not a normal thing to do. Well, the City of South London started. So somebody has another go, and it's called the Central London Railway, now the Central Line. And that opens on the 30th of July, 1900. And it's bigger. And it's more recognisable. The locomotives are big ones, they're much larger. And the coaches are rather lovely. They're based upon the standards of a railway company called the London North Western Railway, which ran out of Euston, and they're rather lovely. There's beautiful leather in the smoking compartments, wonderful moquette, rattan, mahogany, and the most gorgeous livery with heraldry, railway heraldry. Each railway company had at least a dragon or a flag on or whatever. They're really rather nice. Mark Twain actually has a travel on it when it opens, and the Central London Railway opens on the 30th of July 1900. I would say that's the first real modern tube. If you were to go down there, Philip, you go, yeah, that's a tube train. There's no air doors yet. They're gate stock, so they have each car or coach, a car we call it on the underground, has to be opened. The gate has to be opened by a gate man, and then lets you in, closes the gate, presses a button, and the train goes off, and you've got a guard at the back, right? But anyway, again, there's a problem. When you have locomotives, they produce vibrations. You remember the problem with smoke? Well, there's another problem with the Central London Railway. One, it's smelly, and it really does stink. There's not enough ventilation shafts. So what the trains are doing there, you have a piston action. They're pushing fresh, dirty air along from tunnel to tunnel. There's a wonderful description by John Betjeman where he talks about what it was like to travel on the City and South London and Central London Railway. He described the City and South London Railway as rather like a men's changing room in a sports club, and the Central London Railway as a Turkish sauna.
Right, okay.
And very nice. I mean, we talk about why would people want to go under there? And also, you've got a problem. The locomotives are causing vibrations. The line has opened from Bank to Shepherd's Bush. Do you remember the curve? I was terrified.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the trick is they don't want to go under the vibrations of buildings, because if they go under the vibrations of buildings and they start shaking, because these locomotives are really heavy, they're going to have to pay compensation. So when you see that curve at Shepherd's Bush, even to this day, the Central Rail, London Central Line goes through under the middle of the road in Oxford Street, not under. It tries to avoid the buildings because they'll have to pay damages. So the vibrations are causing trouble, and there has to be a solution. And the solution is going to come from America, which I'll explain. It's called what we call a multiple unit. Now, instead of having a locomotive, you put at the end of each train the motors and the driving cabs. And what that does, if you can imagine what a man called Frank Sprague, he didn't have a very clever American, because the tube is going to be American in the way that the Metropolitan and the District Railway never were. And bear in mind, the District Railway and the Metropolitan have turned on each other. There's been a civil war under London. What had happened in the 1860s, the Metropolitan had set up the District Railway as a shadow company to protect its original investors, and it breaks off, a bit like a civil war. And the District Railway and the Metropolitan Railway hate each other. Absolutely hate each other. Even to this day, my dad, when he was on the Underground, said Metropolitan men and District Railway men, District Line men do not get on. And it's run by one man called Edward Watkin for the Met and James Statsford. And that's another reason why people want to build deep level tubes, because those tubes are providing a steam service. They're not getting new coaches in. So when the Underground, the deep level railways turn up, those two have been at each other's throats from day one. They end up having fights. They ended up with building two competing stations, one literally erected overnight over in the east of the city to compete with each other. They are told by Parliament to build the Circle Line. It takes them 20 odd years to do it because they refuse to cooperate. Absolutely refuse. So the tube lines pop up. It's not just because the blue clay, but also because the Met and the District are at each other's throats. And one had green engines, one had red engines, and never the train shall meet. They loathe each other. They underdo it on money. They play foul tricks on proper. There's fist fights between staff. So anyway, the deep level tube has turned up. Multiple unit. What's that do? Think of it a bit like a choir. All the motors on a train, which is spread down. This is how the train on the Underground works today. Instead of one person singing just a tenor starting to sing la 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 la, through low voltage control wires, all the motors do the same thing at the same time. It's like a choir. So every time you see a train, Underground train pull in, think it's like a choir. When one motor is ready or the brake comes off, all the brakes come off at the same time. When one motor the driver opens what's called the dead man's handle, the throttle, all the motors move at the same time. It's so simple, it's basic, and it makes the modern electric train. So you don't have to have a big locomotive that creates lots of vibrations. You can spread the motors down and make it more powerful. It means there's more room as well. It's very clever. It's simple. It's an American invention. And this is the Yanks are coming. We in the 80s are struggling to find in London the money. There's lots of schemes to build these new tubular railways, and most of them come to nothing. There's tube mania. It's a phrase which Christian Woolmer came up with, a very great railway read. Do have a listen to him. And one of the best short books on the history of the Underground is A Subterranean Railway. And he talks about tube mania. Lots of schemes, no money. And guess who's the first one who comes over and puts his head round the door and says, what's all this about tubular railways? It's J.P. Morgan. He's arrived in London. His dad already, J.P. Morgan, the bankers, the richest man on the planet, the man who's literally bailed out the American government by giving them gold in 1896. We are talking the absolute robber baron. We are talking unprincipled capitalism, except for he's not the worst. 1898, and he talks about these underground schemes. And he thinks to himself, okay, we can make money here. Another person. And he's very important to you. He's a man called Charles Tyson Yerkes. He turns up in the capital about the same time. Now, I'll tell you about Yerkes. Do you know the film The Producers by Mel Brooks at all?
No.
Well, Mel Brooks, it's about putting on a stage show, which is called Springtime for Hitler, which is designed to close, right? And he's a crook. He's a charlatan. And he has a character called Max Bialystock, and the man is a complete charlatan. Well, who gets the Underground we love and use today? Bill, a complete crook. His name is Charles Tyson Yerkes, and he goes around. He's gone to jail for fraud, this man, okay? He's not the biggest robber baron. He's like one of those scavenging animals at the bottom of he's not like a big great white shark. He's one of the smaller sharks. He's not. If you think of great white shark, that's JP Morgan. This is a tiger. Still nasty, but smaller. And he turns up in London and he sees all these different underground schemes. And one of which is called, is a Baker Street and Waterloo Railway. And that's going to run from Baker Street down to Elephant and Castle. And it's going to come the Bakerloo. And now the one is called the Great Northern Piccadilly and Brompton. Well, it's two companies. And bungs those together. Yerkes buys them up because they're all failing. So he buys them up cheap. The Charing Cross, Euston and Hampstead Railway, now part of the Northern Line. That's not got there. That's finance. Is struggling to get the finance. He buys that up cheap as well. And what he does, he goes back to America and says, like Max Bialystock in The Producers, he goes to lots of very rich American donors, often I think my favorite is the widows of Boston and Dallas, and says, there is gold under those streets in London. All you have to do is sign the check, please. And I guarantee you, as part of the Underground Electric Railway Company of London, you will make millions. You'll be mad not to. And they all sign over. Well, guess what? There's no gold under the streets of London. None of the railway, they don't make money. But anyway, JP Morgan is also saying, I am going to build, there be money under the streets. And he's going to build the underground railway. And his underground railway is going to be 24 hours. It's going to be bigger. And it would have run far out into the suburbs than the original system. Well, anyway, JP Morgan's not a complete fool. He realizes he doesn't want to put all his eggs in one basket. He asks another group of people who are building in West London what's called the London United Tramways, will they come in and will form a Piccadilly group? And that's how we'll finance the Morgan Tube or the Piccadilly Group tubes. So you've got the Piccadilly Group tubes, which is JP Morgan, and the other side you've got Charles Tyson Yerkes, who is a crook and is convincing old lady widows basically in Boston to part with their money. Now, what does Yerkes do? It contacts the boss of the London United Tramways, and JP Morgan needs London United Tramways for the financing, and he basically bribes him. That's it. He might have even blackmailed him, knowing Yerkes. Come over my side. And sure enough, he does. The London United Tramways basically switches allegiance. It goes over to Yerkes. And JP Morgan is absolutely, he can't believe he's the alpha male. He's the big one. He's the great white. And this cheeky, appalling man from Chicago has basically completely screwed his plans. And he is furious here. The most skullduggery, deadly I have ever seen in my life. Yerkes beats JP Morgan. The President Grover Cleveland couldn't beat JP Morgan, but Yerkes does. And Yerkes then gets a monopoly basically in deep level through the blue clay with multiple units, DC traction, direct current, and it's a bought-in package. It's an American bought-in package, a mass transit package. If you go to the railways, at the same time, not just London, if you look around the metro systems of the world, it's American technology. You'll see it. If you take an underground engineer from London in 1906, take them to New York, and they will recognize, because guess what? All the technology, all the locomotive, all the coaches, all the motors are built under license by a company called British Thompson Euston. Guess what? It isn't British. It's American, and it's been disguised as British. So the Paris Metro is using American technology. The British, the Underground is using American technology. The New York subway, it's American mass transit. Proof of that is this. If you want to prove it's an American system, it's Yank. One, the press hate Yerkes because it's American. How dare they? They like the Central London Railway because that's a proper British railway. None of this American nonsense. Anyway, the railways tear into them. To this day, on the Underground, it's not a carriage, it's a car. It's not a signal box, it's a signal cabin. On the mainline railways, to this day, you have up and down services. Oh no, on the Underground, you have northbound, southbound, eastbound, westbound. That's Yank. That's American. It's American technology, bought out, literally bought off the shelf, tried and trusted. Frank Sprague, the brilliant Frank Sprague, who basically got completely and totally turned over by Edison, who nicked all his ideas. That's the technology. It's bought in as a package. Yerkes also very quickly gets built a massive power station for these new tube lines at Chelsea called Lots Road. It's later called the Monster. It even features in a famous poster by the wonderful artist McKnight Corther. It's called the Monster, or Lots Road Power Station. And that's built based on American practice, whereas before each railway had its own little generating station. This is one massive one, which will power anything and has room for expansion. Now, Yerkes might have been a crook, but he got it built. And basically, in a very short period, not only does he buy the district railway under the Metropolitan Railway, which has hated the district since the bust up, And the district has gone alone in 1871. Things are now we've got it like Dracula. They're about to descend on the neck. And guess who pushes them aside? Yerkes. So he takes the district railway and puts it with the tube lines, and he gets it electrified using Lots Road again as the power source. So in a very, very rapid period, you end up with a load of what is basically the heart of the underground to this day in central London open. So Baker Street and Waterloo Railway, 10th of March 1906. The Great Northern, Piccadilly and Brompton, now part of the Piccadilly line, opens on the 15th of December 1906. And David Lloyd George is there. And David Lloyd George, by the way, turns around and says, I know full well this is never going to make a profit. You're in serious financial trouble. Have you thought of nationalising it? So even early on, they know it's not going to work. So,
well, isn't it to this day still not actually profitable?
No, not at all. Never was.
Never was. And the amount of people using it, it's incredible.
Well, I mean, I'm going to give you. It's a very good point you've just made there. I'm going to give you some figures. Let's have a look at some figures here for the period. Right, the number of people using population of London 1801 is 1 million. By the time the underground opens just before 1861, it's 3 million. By 1901, it's 6 million. By 1939, 8 million, nearly 9 million. It was bigger in 1939 than it is now, but London is still growing. The number of passengers using the underground, the first bit of the Metropolitan is the line expands. It's 10 million in 1863, so it's quite popular. And by 1939, you've got just under 1 billion people are going to use it. We don't get back to 1 billion people again until 2007 because the cars come in. So already, even with all those people using the underground, it's not making money. It's seen. And you've got to make a decision. Is it a public service, central public service, which you've got to build, although that's not cheap, or not? But can London live without this? Here's another problem. Do you remember you were saying, why the hell would you want to travel on an underground like that? Well, you're bloody right. The situation is this. People don't want to go on the tube. So we have this situation, the Bakerloo line, or the Baker Street and Waterloo Railway, very soon has to run shorter trains because people won't use it. It's a very unusual thing. On the 22nd of June, 1907, is a very important moment in London underground history. The Charing Cross, Euston and Hampstead. Basically, it ran from Charing Cross to Euston. It's the last link. It's called the last link. It's opened again by David Lloyd George, who's in charge of the Board of Trade. He's going to become Chancellor, famous Chancellor. And it's called the last link because that's going to be the last bit of the London Underground. Mm-hmm. And guess what? Again, people are not travelling. And you're absolutely right, what you were saying earlier, Philippa. You have this strange situation. Pieces died. He died of kidney failure, and he has this mausoleum built in New York. He had an art collection like all these robber barons, and he also built up what was one of the greatest telescopes in the world, where Carl Sagan actually cut his teeth as an astronomer, was actually using Yerkes' telescopes. But when they open the new man in charge, called a man called George Gibb, opens the office of Yerkes, goes in, gets the key, goes into his desk and opens, and he finds £30,000 stuffed inside. What Yerkes had been doing, he'd been dipping into the fare book and using it. And they soon discover, to their horror, that all of the railways, the new tube lines, so they have got them built quickly, if they don't pay a dividend, they promise to these lovely old ladies in Boston and in Dallas and so on, all these somewhat naive American men who are being fleeced by the Chicagoan, the man, if they don't pay up, they're going to go bankrupt. So they are in real trouble. And what do? Well, first and foremost, they got a man called Edward Speer. He's Edward's Jewish financier, very much Middle Europe, German background, very cultured man. He's the person who will give the backing and pay for Richard Strauss's Salome, the opera, to be composed. It's actually on the libretto for Salome. It says dedicated to Edward Speer. And Richard Strauss's Salome, when it's performed for the first time, causes a riot. I mean, people are horrified because of, it's fairly strong meat, but Edgar Speer stays with him. He's a very cultured man. And he goes with Sir George Gibb, who's opened the drawer and found out basically there's 30 grand in there. And she's just taken. And they go one night in secret to go and see up to Frognall in North London, to go to see this rather eccentric Edwardian couple called Beatrice and Sidney Webb. And they secretly say to them, look, you're Fabian socialists or something, right? You're a funny bunch. What would you say if you could approach for us, the London County Council, and we say the problem, if you can lend us a bailout now, about 5.5 million we're going to need, that's a lot of money then. And we will pay it back at 6.5 interest over 30 years. And in 30 years' time, a bit like the later PPP under Gordon Brown, 30 years' time, London County Council will own the tube lines. And Beatrice turns round to Sir George Gibb and Edward Spare, says, no, I can't see that working. It's not about, you do need a one board to run transport in London. Well, that's not enough. What about the Metropolitan Railway? That should work with the rest of it. It's in London, for goodness sake. What about the buses? No, I'm sorry, I can't do that. So Edward Spare is there in desperation, finally bails it out. He goes and gets basically a bit like a remortgage. He goes to the NatWest bank manager or the equivalent on Wall Street and says, we'll refinance it. And he gets bonds and it saves the day. But the Underground is in danger of going completely bankrupt. And in desperation, hard-nosed capitalists are prepared to go and talk to the Fabians about how you organise it. And that is the problem, and you can go right back to the earliest days, the Thames Tunnel. The Thames Tunnel only gets built because the fear is that Mark Brunel is about to be poached by the Tsar, and so you'll have a brain drain. He's too useful. He's got mad ideas, all of them pretty good. And the person who bails out the Thames Tunnel and gets Mark Brunel out of a jail is the Duke of Wellington. And it's one of those strange situations in Parliament. He says, I know this is a bit strange to you all. We're going to actually have to pay for this. The government's going to have to give something towards it because London needs it, this Thames Tunnel, and it's been the same ever since. You could carry on to this day. We need it. How do we finance it? And at the time when you're building these things, you've always got to look at economic crisis. The mid-Victorian, the late Victorian Great Depression stops the building of cable underground lines. There is the collapsing banking collapse of 1866. Affects the spread of the early cut and covers. And you can go 1929, the Wall Street crash, and you could argue 2008 with regard to the Underground now. So never ever, the thing I particularly want to do in the books I've done is that never see the Underground in a vacuum. And then we have the technology. You've always got to see what's going on around the rest of the world. It's American. It's very important to point that. Even to this day, the Underground has its own special feels. The rest of the railways still a bit strange. They call them moles. That's what they are. And London transport staff to this day are effortlessly. They're often better trained. They're often more. I think if you ever have the privilege, if I had, to interview Underground workers, particularly engineers, ordinary people, the quality. Sorry, but the private operators on the national network could learn an awful lot from listening to. Look at the superb training, the apprenticeship schemes of London Underground. They're a cut above because they have to be. Because you're running a service with millions of people travelling on it, deep in the ground, and you've got to be safer. Because the trains are running so close to each other. And there are lots of clever American safety systems, what we call a trip cock. And what happens, a little arm, when a signal changes its colour, a little arm pops up. You might hear it sometimes if you're on a platform. If a train goes past the signal when it's red, it hits a valve. And it's called gets tripped. And that moment, all the air in the reservoirs, which keep the brakes off, go on. So the train stops. If the driver or the train operator, he or she, takes the hand off the controller, the train stops. That's all American. So in many ways, it's much safer than the original steam railway. And because it has to handle people, it's mass transit. Remember that phrase, mass transit. Tells you what it is. It does exactly what it says on the tin. Financing and going forward. People aren't using the tube. What will change that are two things. The First World War. The railways are taken over, the national railways are taken over by the government, run by the government during the duration of the war. The deep level underground railways aren't. They're seen as kind of underground tramways still. So they're not actually taken over by the government. The district and the Metropolitan railways are taken over. That's fascinating. So you see the subsurface ones, they're real railways. What's this underground thing? It'll never catch on, this deep level thing. So what does happen is war workers, troops and so on and so on, people start using the underground. In fact, there's a problem with congestion for the first time. First World War, I promise you, off-peak, on the Bakerloo, for example, you've got plenty of leg room to stretch. Nobody using it. That's what war people start using it. And another important thing, do you remember we had this issue? Why the hell would you want to travel under the ground into, in the bowels of the earth next to people you don't know and so on and so forth? How the hell do you get people to travel. This is a railway which is fighting for its existence. You better do some marketing. And again, where did they get the idea? The Underground is doing one of the great things. This is a unique moment in art. And so, no, it's not. Classic example of branding. Classic example of really effective marketing. Because the great art, the great posters, the great logo, the brown door with Underground, we all know the red and beautiful, right? Nothing new about this. I would give you one of the greatest examples of early marketing is Coca-Cola. You all know what a Coca-Cola sign looks like, and you all know what a Coca-Cola bottle looks like. And that is American marketing. And guess what? Yerkes and the early Tube bring that methodology, branding, effective branding. Later on, they will develop a perfected typeface by a man called Edward Johnson. Edward Johnson is the master calligrapher, produces something of exquisite beauty, Johnson typeface. They muck about with it later on. They should be ashamed of themselves in the 80s and call it New Johnson. It's never as good. Thankfully, TfL, bless them, has now gone back to something with the original. Can you imagine somebody coming over and saying, let's rewrite the King James Bible? Right. well, in calligraphy term, that happens. And they spin it, but absolute disgrace. He's a thing of beauty, Johnson. It's a master calligrapher. He designed these by the river at Hammersmith, near the Dove's Press. Big friend of William Morris and that arts and craft movement. Yeah. And if you want to see something, I know it's very rare. This is not going to sound strange. If you want to see something beautiful, have a look at the letters Johnson comes in. You're going to go online, just have a look at it. The Johnson typeface. Look at the number 9. The curve, it's without, it's sans serif. It's simplicity. And here's the lovely thing. There are many different ways it came from. But if you have a look at Trajan's column, the lettering, you'll see something familiar. I think that's just beautiful. And Edward Johnson, bless him, he knew his history. He knew like William Morris. So it's marketing. Look at Coca-Cola. Other examples of classic marketing would be Guinness. Everybody knows what the Guinness the heart looks like. Well, the Underground does the same. And they have to do the same. And the man who's going to come, 2 people have turned up. George Gibb is he's the Aberdeen who's taken over from Yerkes. He, again, a person, people who really should get a proper mention. And it's outrageous. Nobody's heard of him. He is Aberdeen. He really is the man in many ways who does save the Underground. And he's a brilliant headhunter. He'd worked for the North Eastern Railway, based around York, which is, ran the railways around York, Newcastle and Durham. Big railway company, very powerful, quite progressive, set up by Quakers. They could connect back to the first railways in Darlington. And they're a progressive organisation. They recognise trade unions and things early on. And they like early electrification. And they're not bad at marketing. And they're looking to America of how to do this. So they're buying, not only you're buying in the direct current DC traction package, you're also buying in the techniques of good artwork, good logos, boom, 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 boom. And George Gibb is also a fantastic eye for somebody who's good. He's a good headhunter. And there's a very quite insular, young solicitor called Frank Pick. And Frank Pick is working in the office in York. He's a solicitor for the North Eastern Railway. And when George Gibb is enticed with a lot of money, please come to London and save us, he takes Frank Pick with him. Frank Pick is born in Lincolnshire. He's from a Unitarian family, a classic nonconformist background. As a young man, he sketched birds. He loves nature, has a fantastic love of art and culture. He's a very cultured man, quite intense, but I think also and painfully shy. He writes the most. He's also a disappointed lover. He's very romantic. Absolutely loves anything to do with William Morris. But often people make, Frank Pick wrote in green iron ink, that makes him mad. No, he was copying his hero, William Morris. He also is a mad Wagnerite. He loves Wagner. Shows that he's actually underneath this shy exterior, quite abrupt at times. He was a passionate person. And he's a great believer in the total art, the Gesamtkunstfight concept of Wagner, that everything must work together. You have total art. Well, he wants total design, total underground. So everything should work together. And this will then, when he comes up with a concept of what we call fitness for purpose. Well, actually, what he's doing, he's rebranding what Ruskin has come up with, or William Morris, that if something works well, it will also look beautiful as well. Simplicity. It speaks for itself. And that good design should be timeless. So he brings this quite eccentric young man who's a mad Wagner. His favourite opera is Tristan und Isolde. That's something nobody knows about. He's very cold. No, he's not. He's a very shy, disappointed romantic. That's what I regard him. And there's a lot of People have tried to make him out as a kind of a difficult man. Yes, he is difficult, but he's also capable of great kindness, acts of great kindness. I think people look at Pick and they just look at what I describe as fetishized design. Instead of looking at the context, none of it's original. It's been brought in. Walter Gropius is going to come up with the classic mid-European century European look. But there's other things to Pick. Nobody mentions, and I think this is outrageous. He designed the evacuation scheme for the children of London. I think that's his greatest gift to London. He saves thousands of lives. Never gets a mention. Nobody mentioned that he was a passionate lover of music. Used to go to the opera twice a week. Had a sweet tooth. And here's a lovely little story. It's actually Christian Woolmer told me. He was giving a talk on Frank Pick. And Frank Pick, somebody came up to him after the talk in Germany and said, I used to live next to Frank Pick up in Golders Green. And he lives in a classic kind of Tudor, mock Tudor house up in the family. You can still see there's a blue plaque up there. And he said, what's it like living next to Frank Pick? He says, the woman said, turn around every year on my birthday and on Christmas Day, the lovely Mr. Pick would bang on the door, ring the bell, and give us all a present. So rather than being this austere creature, there was a passionate, rather sensitive man. I think suffering possibly from manic depression. But a genius, and like great people, I'm very sad when I think about the decline of. He's humiliated by Churchill when he said, because he's working for the Ministry of Information and dies of. I think he's having small strokes. He dies. It's tragic, the end of Frank Pick. I don't like the way he's been described as some unthinking autonoman. Yes, he has. There's more to life than just the design. He's come to the underground. There's another man, though. Again, when we're dealing with the great Frank Pick with perfected underground stations, I'm going to give you do people think Frank Pick is the chairman? If they put it Frank Pick, do people think he's the chairman of London Transport? He's not. Oh, no. I want you to think of Eric Morecambe and Ernie Wise. There's a double act in charge of the underground from 1908 to 1904. Albert Stanley. Now, Albert Stanley, later Lord Ashfield, is actually in many ways far more important than Frank Pick, but I bet you haven't heard of him. That is where the history has gone very strange, looking at Frank Pick in isolation, not looking at how the underground has been financed, not looking at this conversation, for example, with the Fabians, who are going to come up with a solution here, and it's going to be called London Transport. It's going to be a hell of a battle to get there, though, because this is radical. But there's another man, Lord Ashfield. Now, Ashfield is completely contrasting with Frank Pick. Ashfield had worked his way up. He's originally born in Derbyshire. His family had gone to America and settled in Detroit. And he was one of these boys. He's always getting into trouble. He'd always have a slingshot in his pocket and stuff. He liked to muck about, naughty boy. But also, he became obsessed with and fascinated by streetcars. And Detroit has a streetcar system. Instead of going to, like his father wanted him to go and become a minister in the church, he goes and runs off and joins the streetcar company. And in a very quick time, he's in charge of it by the time he's 21. And he's worked his way up from the workshops to the top. He's brilliant. Now, the lovely thing about Frank Pick does the design in exquisite taste, employs a generation of great artists to do posters, great marketing. None of it's original. And also one of the reasons it's as often vaunted, the collection has survived intact where others haven't. But you look at, say, the LNER in the 1930s, they're doing very similar things. But what Ashfield brings to it is this. He's a people person. He's very funny.
He can do the conversations, the diplomacy, and whatever's required, the negotiations.
He's a terrible golfer. Absolutely bloody awful golfer.
He lets his opponents win. I get it.
No, he can't. He not only lets them win, he can't play.
Oh, yes.
He brings them down with his terrible check shoes and a pair of, he's got his shoes on his golf club. And he brings them down to Surrey. And I contacted the Coombe Down Surrey golf club, who fantastic. They'll get back. And they went through their books. And oh yes, we still have the Lord Ashfield Prize for the best amateur. Have a look who's he's taking there. Look at other people. People who will have a round of golf with Ashfield. David Lloyd George, Neville Chamberlain, the Prince of Wales, Churchill. That's who he's talking for. Right. And he is the chairman. He's the chairman. If you like, Frank Pick is the CEO. And it is a disgrace that Ashfield has disappeared. I'm fairly certain you won't have heard of him. Him and the civil servant at the Ministry of Transport called Cecil Hurcombe, and a young Fabian transport minister in 1929, when by accident a Labour government, the second Labour government, because Baldwin is miscalculated, and by accident, Labour are back in, not expected. A young man called Herbert Morrison makes an announcement from the benches of the Commons and says, we're going to take over the Underground, we're going to take over the Metropolitan, and we're going to take over the trams, and we're going to... And the phrase was, if you look at hands up, there was a shudder from the Conservative benches.
Because are we talking hostile takeover?
It was public takeover. The idea is the idea is what Morrison wants to do. They want the state or a public body which is going to not report to shareholders, but is going to have a board. There will be shareholders initially. Is going to report to a body of people there to protect the interest of the passenger for the first time. And it's going to operate. It's going to take them all over, bang heads together and make them work together. Just like Frank Pick had always wanted.
So almost like so almost direct. This is quite controversial then, presumably. You're taking a private asset, private company.
The only examples you really had would be the post office at this point, the largest nationalised, or call it Royal Mail. It had been set up on the job, but it is as public ownership. Nationalisation or public ownership had floated around. Lord, in many ways, Gladstone had used it as a stick to warn them with in 1846. But there have been, ultimately, when George Gibb and Edward Speyer go and see the Fabian, to go and see the Webbs, they are offering public ownership in the long term. But that's not good enough for the Fabians. Now, it isn't just a case of private versus public. I'm going to give you an example. Because it's a laissez-faire system, there is a degree of regulation. The Metropolitan Railway and the District Railway loathe each other. There was a rivalry that continued right into the London Transport period. So my dad remembered that there was a wonderful phrase when he just collected his uniform in 1959, come out of the army, typical Irish citizen in the British Army. He comes out and he's sent down to Lambeth to get his uniform. There was a man, the station master at Euston Square, still had Metropolitan on his wing, on his lapels. And he had also, he used to wear a wing collar. And he says, now listen here, young man, just been fighting in Malaya, but young man, you come here. When you've been down there, you come back to me, and I'm going to give you the best advice ever. Never trust any man on the district. That's what he says. They're all awful. And this was 1959. Those people don't get on. I'll give you an example. If you're going to spend a day at Lord's watching the cricket, and let's say you want to get down to your gentleman's club. Now, Lord's is on one of the stations now closed, which is out of Baker Street, which is the heart of the Metropolitan Railway. This is the Metropolitan Railway of Lord Aberconway and another man called Robert Selby. They are the equivalents of Frank Pick and Lord Ashfield, and they're a match for each other. Met somehow escapes being swallowed up on a number of occasions by other railways. It's a Bantam cock. It's always having bust-ups with people. It has a bust-up with the Great Western in 1864, 63. The Great Western withdraws all its locomotives and coaches in the idea, well, that will force the Metropolitan to behave. And guess what? They borrow a load off the Great Northern. They just about survive, and then to give them just enough time to get their own coaches and buy their own trains. It is a railway company which is always having fights with people. It's a little railway company, quite profitable, quite a number of people using it. It has no respect for others in many ways. Right, you'll go to Lord's, you can see the cricket. You get on the Metropolitan Railway at Baker Street. At Lord's, catch the train into Baker Street. You want to go to Pall Mall to go to your gentleman's club. Well, if you booked via the Metropolitan Railway, and this is up to 1933, up to 1st of July 1933, you have to buy a separate ticket if you want to use the Bakerloo. You can't. You've got to go round on the Circle line by the Metropolitan down to South Kensington and do it that way. There's no through booking because they're competing. So when Herbert Morrison, this young wet behind the ears, stands up and says, we are going to set up a board. There have been talk about this for years. And bear in mind, Lord Ashfield tried to create a private monopoly, right? Ashfield said, no, Morrison. And Ashfield's furious. And you go, these bloody socialists has come in. What's he done? And Cyril Hercombe is the permanent secretary at the Ministry of Transport, approaches to Ashfield and says, right, do you want to take over the Metropolitan Railway? He goes, yes. Do you want to deal with the tram cars, the LCC, London County Council tram cars, because they're cutting you? Yes. Do you want it on the trolley buses? Yes. He goes, right. Well, what this young chap with his transport schemes, Herbert Morrison, is offering everything you want. The only difference is it's not private, it's public. You're going to get everything you want. You'd be mad not to do it. He thinks about it. So they arrange a meeting, and the Underground is having its annual dinner at the Ritz along Park Lane. And Herbert Morrison comes along as the new Minister of Transport. And you could hear, you could hear an elephant drop at this point, a bin drop. And he sits him down and he goes, stands up, and he's had to go ding, 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 does a speech. I would like to congratulate Lord Ashfield on those magnificent new stations that Mr. Pick has come out with. And I've lost thinking, oh, what a progressive employee you are. You look after your staff, you care for them, you recognise trade unions. There is so much. And I would like to raise your glass to all you fine gentlemen. And of course, they love it. Then, over a quiet period, and it takes a lot of effort, when nobody's around at the Saturdays, and bear in mind, Lord Ashfield is a Conservative lord. Lloyd George, Frank Pick's politics, classic Lloyd George, radical liberal. So you have this extraordinary situation with a Fabian socialist, an Empire free trade loyalist, conservative unionist in Ashfield, and a liberal, classic radical liberal, all somehow get to work together. And there he is. Nobody knows about it. Hercombe arranges it over 3 weekends, or 3 Saturdays, when nobody's in the Ministry of Transport. Morrison gets the donuts in and the coffee, and the two of them start talking. And then what he does, he says to Ashfield, I need you, Morrison. I'm going to need you, if I'm going to sell this to your shareholders, to tell them to sell up. So what will I get from it? He says, you'll get everything you want, but it can't be a private monopoly. You get a public monopoly. And it's a monopoly of land transport and underground railway in a 50-mile radius from Charing Cross. It's quite a lot. It goes out as far as London Transport goes out. Future London Transport goes out as far as East Grinstead. Stevenage, Hatfield, 50 miles. In the 1970s, it's cut back to 30 miles. Now, these days, with the Elizabeth line, it goes all the way out to Maidenhead, you could say. And he thinks about it. He says, right, OK, I need you to go in and bat for it, says Morrison, he says to Ashfield. And Ashfield, remember I was talking about a delightful, very naughty, absolutely impish sense of humour. I'll give you a joke from Ashfield. Great fun, Scotland golfer, connected, has the ability to get people. And he goes to the Methodist Free Hall in London, and you've got all the shareholders of all the different companies that make up the Underground Group. It's what's called the Combine. And they're in horror at this Soviet-style takeover, that this creeping socialism, as they call it. And there he goes. I have always strived, and you get the little violins. I have always strived to do my very best for you people, says Ashfield. But I must recommend to you now that you must take the offer on their hand. I would never lie to you. And it's a masterpiece. He should have got an Oscar. And he says, I have decided, therefore, to resign as chairman. If you do not trust me on this, I must resign. And of course, there's tears in the eye. No, don't go, Lord Ashfield. We love you so much. This is Lord Ashfield with his all you had spats and loud ties. It's great fun. And the places are washed with tears, are marvellous. And of course, they only go and sign their death warrant. Points. They all come up. But if Ashfield hadn't been able to pull that number, Morrison doesn't get it. Labour government fails, collapses in August. Again, economic circumstances. The Piccadilly line north of Finsbury Park has been built primarily out to Cockfosters, has been primarily as part of unemployment relief. They work out that it'll create 30,000 jobs, and at least 3,500, 5,000 unemployed Welsh miners can come up and dig it. Economic. If you think of it, the birth of London Transport, the gestation for London Transport, which is long and drawn out, including the collapse of the government, takes from December 1929 to the 1st of July 1933. But it happens, slightly diluted from what Morrison does, and then the London Passenger Transport Board, I love saying that, is born. The London Passenger Transport Board, eventually fully nationalised, because there are shares in it, because they're compensation shares, famous C dividend. You can see the DNA of today's Transport for London, which has been copied around the world. London Transport as a plan, as a model, is copied around the world. Again, when you look at Pick, don't just look at the design of the station. They're magnificent. Often it's actually drawing on a larger European moment in graphic art, in design of moquette for the seats, and in architecture. When you're looking at the beautiful tube stations, much lauded, and rightly so, think Walter Gropius, but diluted to use traditional English material. That's the exquisite taste of Frank Pick. And Frank Pick is a wonderful man in many ways. He gets Charles Holden, this great architect, to come and says, look, we're going to go to Europe. We're going to try and see what they're doing. and bring it back to London and see if we can make the perfect tube station. Tube stations where there'll never need to be queuing outside. Tube stations where you would want to go underground because it's a civilizing experience. And also that the wonderful thing about Frank Pick, he does some great things. He's a great believer in equality in many ways. For example, there is a wonderful poster, again, does have a sense of humour. And it shows an Edwardian, very beautiful Edwardian lady with a mild classic hat on her, pointing at a map. No need to, it's easy to the underground, showing that women can use it. Bear in mind the shopping experience, going to Selfridges. Selfridges wanted to pay for an underground to their own entrance into Oxford Street. Regularly asked the underground, would you rename the Oxford Street Circus Station as Selfridges? So the shopping afternoon, going to the football, going to see the rugby, going to the cinema. Very important. The underground creates the suburbs as it bursts out of the tunnels. It also creates the Saturday afternoon, the Saturday night out. That is what happens in London. But Pick also, he's quite radical. I mean, if you look, he's this poster of this woman pointing at her. Look at the colours, the colours she's wearing. She's wearing green and purple. This is the poster's about 1908. It's the height of the suffragettes. So he's being naughty. Somebody's having a joke. And he also, Pick employs and commissions a generation of female poster artists. It's not just McKnight Caulfield, though I'd love his stuff. You've also got to look at, and Man Ray, of course, famous surrealist, produces a famous London Transport poster in 1938. Female poster artists, Dora Batty, Nancy Smith, Margaret Colkin-James and Mary Coo. These are magnificent posters at a time when women aren't getting commissions. That's Frank Pick.
Is the motivation then behind getting London Transport together in the way that it is? It sounds to me like it's not a brilliant investment. It's not going to make money and it's going to cost you money. But there's a bigger sort of ideological and political agenda here.
The issue is, if you're going to expand the underground, which needs to expand because London is getting bigger every year. Let's have a look at the population, say, for 1939. By 1939, because of the spread of the underground, there are 8 million, just under 9 million people living in London.
Sounds chicken and egg to me. It's sort of like you can move more people around, so more people are here, so you need more.
They're going to have to
transport. Yeah.
Now, in the case of the Metropolitan Railway, they've done something before 1933. They've done something very clever and very naughty. Railway companies are not allowed to own land except for really transport purposes. Well, somehow the Metropolitan Railway sneaks through just as the Conservative and Liberal governments in 1870 odd are collapsing, manages to get through a law where it can buy residual land and then sell it on. And that is what we will end up with. It's the basis behind what we will call Metroland, which is the Metropolitan Railway Country Estates Company. Now, the wonderful thing about the MRCE, it has exactly the same board members as the Metropolitan Railway. So, and what they do, alongside the line, they will build a line. Do you remember Field of Dreams? Build it and they will come. Well, they certainly do. And they rip up an awful lot of Middlesex doing it. There is absolutely no need, really, for the Stanmore branch when it was constructed in 1932. But this is the time where they're still competing. Because guess what? If you go to Stanmore, Edgware, on the other part, under the Pick and Ashfield underground, it's just up the road. What they do is that you build the railway, you've got the extra land, you sell the land onto builders, and then make a tidy profit. So in other sense, chicken and egg you were saying there, the incentive for the Metropolitan Railway isn't always public transport needs. It's about making money.
Yeah.
So, and an awful lot of green Middlesex disappears as a result. And that is what London Transport is about. Well, is that, is that why you're building these lines? Are you building just to construct lots of mock Tudor buildings? Osbert Lancaster talks about this. Osbert Lancaster is very funny, and he comes up with the phrase mock Tudor. But if you go out to Rayners Lane, if you go at Uxbridge, and if you go out even up as far as Pinner, you've got lines of Betcham's famous and still delightful, go online if you haven't seen it, Metroland, and it explains it. It's as he delightfully says, a very clever member of the board said, wouldn't it be good if we bought up some of these fields and orchards? And that the wonderful phrase, a country clerk turned gentleman again and linked to the metropolis by train. He does the poetry of the underground. Nevertheless, it's dodgy.
Is there any underground system that is profitable? Is New York Profitable?
I think Singapore is, and Hong Kong. But even then, the underground now gets no public subsidy. Practically not. We have the lowest subsidy at all. It's one of those things. It's like,
If it's making a loss, the money's coming from somewhere.
it's got to come somewhere. Oh, yeah, being fair, but they do it. And also, it's like schools don't make money. The state say, but you're going to have them. Even Disraeli got that right. It's very interesting, actually. You often find the Conservative governments of the 1870s are the ones who are trying to tame, one, give the workers the votes, and two, tame unbridled, uncontrolled, unfettered capitalism. In the case of London Transport, they're trying to bring, finally, a coordinated, integrated transport concept. And it's fascinating. You've got three politically contrasting individuals in Morrison, Ashfield and Pick, and they are on that order of importance. Incredibly.
Good example of when, if it's a good idea.
Yes,
it's
just
yeah.
Why? Because we need it, and it's not going to go away. You've got it, and you better order it. In the meantime, Pick has made it. The station's better. They're starting to look beautiful. As I say, European modernism, but toned down using Portland stone and red brick. The kind of structure that Miss Marple isn't going to be feel too disturbed by if she was travelling. Or Poirot might go and say, that is a fine uplighter as he gets on. And they become to epitomise. The underground of the 30s is a joyful thing when you think about the 1980s. And what I love about London Transport as a concept, I think Overy describes it as a morbid age. It's a very miserable time in Britain. You've got the means test, and you could argue that you shouldn't be spending so much on the stations. This is when people are losing their furniture. There are mass unemployment in the depressed areas in South Wales. Yet something bright and clever and beautiful emerges. And it's London Transport, the best design, the new 1938 tube train, a design classic, though actually mechanically a little bit suspect. Again, the rosy things need to be qualified, not to destruction qualified, but it's never always plain sailing with a lot of the designs. Nevertheless, something amazing talk. London Transport is paying better than all of the big four railways, the LNER, Great Western, Southern and LMS. It gives you a decent uniform. You've got good canteens. Remember I was telling you about when I was a little boy?
Christmas for him. Yeah, I'm intrigued by that.
You really look at and a really smart uniform. And you get the family become London Transport families. We get discounts. They look after you. There's a health service. There's a library for the staff at 55 Broadway, the magnificent headquarters, which was disgracefully flogged off. And it doesn't even, the savings were minimal. And it's now going to be turned into a luxury hotel. That was I call it the Vatican of the Underground. And that's, again, designed by Charles Holden. They had a library in there. You could borrow records and stuff. And they look after you. Dad always said, and he's a good union man, he said, well, did you regret, before he passed away, he said, did you regret London? He said, no. If you worked hard, kept your nose clean, they looked after you. They are paying their staff better. Significantly better conditions, full trade union protection. There is, for sick members of staff, there's a convalescence home. There's a flying club you can join if you want. There's chess. There's fantastic football. There is the London Transport Players who are there's an opera company, and they're good. I mean, that's not amateur. They're good. They're getting the best artists. And a very critical times in 1940, I think 10 years in 1943, I think it is. Writes an editorial, and they had absolutely campaigned, this is creeping socialism in 1933, and writes a wonderful, in the midst of the war, it says, London Transport is a force for civilization. And, well, there you go. It's a head of a statement. And Nicholas Pevsner particularly Frank Pick did something very kind. Nicholas Pevsner is a German, was about to be interned on the Isle of Man, next to proper hardcore Nazis, because he was German in 1939. Frank Pick drops what he wants and goes up to the Home Office and says, you let him get him out. And if he hadn't written in his green ink that letter, Pevsner would have been chucked in with hardened Nazis. So he got him out. So Pevsner writes a genuine eulogy when Frank Pick dies from a stroke. And he said, well, that wasn't free, but also in the way he brought good architecture to people and good design, beautiful posters. But it's not just the posters. It's not just the design. And it's so important. Like you can overdo it. We have this situation, particularly in London Underground history, since for the last 30 years. What I've just said is an overemphasis on design without context. And it's why it's been so lovely to talk to you, Philippa, because you've been asking questions about, yes, but where did that come from? None of it's original. It's done with exquisite taste. And London Transport is genuinely described as a force for civilization. And in the midst of a barbaric war where the concepts and the Enlightenment are going, and in a period, a dismal decade, I describe it as, London Transport is a little moment of hope of how you could treat people, how you could make something as unpleasant as having to travel in the bowels of the city, something actually rather special. And that is why I particularly love it. And of course, I think perhaps the war is also in many ways one of the finest moments, and the organisational strength of London Transport will come out during the war.
Imagine something that is stable in a time that is completely anything but.
Beautifully put.
Something
Absolutely
that
put.
you can rely on really becomes so much more important to people. A little bit of normality, a little bit of something that was the same before this awful event, in this case, the war, kicked off. Is we saw it in the pandemic. Anything that felt slightly normal, it just felt amazing. Normal became amazing, and I can imagine that there's a comfort in that that maybe Transport for London was able to provide for its workers and its customers
and its passengers. And that's something also with underground history. Goodness me, the passenger disappears at time. Most passengers are actually not that interested in design. What they're worried about is it safe, how affordable, and has it turned up?
And do I know where I'm going? Let's not forget the rabbit warrenness of the underground as well.
Exactly. Wow. Now, well, you see again. Britain, do you remember always coming up solutions? Well, London is a very inventive person. Now, the tube map, as we all talk about, the great Harry Beck tube map, what it does, it comes up with, it's not a map, first and foremost, it's a diagram. You always get perfect.
Yes, that we can understand. It's
clever. What do you think's the most clever thing about it, apart from the fact it looks beautiful? I think it's become far too crowded, and there is a question whether or not it's actually fit for purpose anymore. Because, the underground is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And also, if we look at London Overground and the national system, that's not, if you don't show you can change here at Brixton, which it doesn't really, you're not doing good into trade, can't it? Again, when I say you've got to be careful about fetishized design, fitness for purpose has no sentimentality. If you're not showing a greater network of suburban lines, which you can use using your Oyster card, it's not working.
You can use your feet between some of the stations that you wouldn't know to, because of course it's schematic.
Well, exactly. But you see, this is where you can overdo it on the design. Now, getting back to Mr. Beck, the most important thing he does, apart from making it's a thing of beauty. It's one of the great 20th century designs. There's no question about that. Beck is a bit of an obsessive. He's actually not that easy to work with. And he had been laid off, and like many other artists and people working at 55 Broadway, bear in mind, London Transport is born in the middle of a depression. All the staff had to initially take a pay cut. So anyway, he's laid off, and he's got a bit of time, and he comes up with this concept. And what has been happening underground is the geographical features have been disappearing over time. The only one that actually survives is the map, is the River Thames by the Beck Bridge. Because that's good. It's only there really for one reason, to show what is North and what's South Thames.
Yeah, you don't want to get off on the wrong side of the river.
Exactly. Sandwiches, more than, I'll pack some sandwiches and a flask, But what he does, what the genius of Beck is, though he may not be the only one doing it, he's saying the Beck map is Beck, because similar things are happening on the NER. A man called George Dow is coming up with a map which is very, very similar. Anyways, now here's the thing, and a very good friend of mine, a wonderful railway historian called John Scott Morgan, and he knows things. He knows he's great fun and just a joy to know. And he comes up with a very interesting concept, which a man who is son of George Dow, went on to run the National Railway Museum. He unfortunately died. And he noticed that each day when Harry Beck was getting on his train at Finchley Central, at this point, Finchley Central was being run by the London North Eastern Railway. It wasn't part of the Underground yet. And on the posters in the compartments of these very tight little coaches, wooden coaches, sure enough, he would have seen a map not that dissimilar to his own. Now, we can't prove that, etc. If you have a look at the work of George Dow, you might want to have a look at Beck at the same time. Now, the problem with the Beck map is this, and Beck did not copyright his design. Those people who did it, and it was very unlikely he would have been allowed to, because each and every time, which is what happens later on with in the 80s with regard to New Johnson, is if you're not careful, the organisation doesn't own it. Are you saying in future Beck owns this map? It is Mr. Beck's map. The Underground has got to pay him give him the payment. He was employed as a freelancer to produce a design. He was paid 5 shillings or whatever, not much. Frank Pick doesn't like it, particularly, not that enthusiastic. Londoners who are normally quite conservative, and they had to pay for it. They gave a penny, tuppence, I think, a penny each, and they handed them out on the new Piccadilly line extension stations up in North London. And Londoners are normally suspicious about change. What's it? Yeah, what you do? And they love it. And they go for it. And that is the beginning of the PIC map. The actual genius is to take the geography out, ban the central section. What's the tube map's primary surface? It's to show you where to change.
Mm.
So you don't need to know whether or not it doesn't have to have the River Fleet on it, or there's the chalk beds of the chalk beds of Surrey. You don't need that. You don't need. All you need to know is where to change, and that is what Beck does do. He clarifies that. He did not copyright it. If he had to copyright it, the Underground would have had to cough out each time. So not unusual. And this has been turned into a play recently. All the truth behind Harry Beck. Harry Beck was actually quite difficult to work with. You can only feel pity for his wife, Nora, who had to suffer with somebody who had, how to put it this way, it would have been very nice if you had to put a pair of slippers on, smoked his pipe and turned on the radio for a change. Instead of, I've got to perfect it. It's got to be done. I can feel only pity for Nora. 1960, they finally push him out, and they produce it, and he's not very nice. It's good. It's not very nice, and the map that comes up is not even a patch of how good the Harry Beck's map is. But originality? ? 2. There's no way legally bang to rights. It does not belong to Harry Beck, and it's been turned into a great injustice. The situation I compare very simply to Terrance Dicks and the Daleks, or Galton and Simpson. 1963, brand new series, Doctor Who. They need the ultimate villains, the monocular Nazis in space, the Daleks. Now, Terry Nation, who worked for the BBC and knew what the BBC could be like, just like George Orwell, though they've got a statue outside, did not like the BBC. He was treated very badly. Room 101, which turns up in 1984, is the BBC room he had to go to and get a dressing down from. Room 101 was in Broadcasting House. That's why he put the number. Terrance Dicks, who comes up and invents the Daleks. He's a Welshman. He's writing lots of things like Z cars at this point. And he thinks, I think his wife very well says, that's a really good idea. You know what you need to do? Copyright it. Galton and Simpson, who set up a company called London Scripts because they do not want to be turned over after Hancock's Fire, copyright a new series of their scripts, their stuff, a new series called Steptoe and Son. Now, if Beck hadn't been in a position to do that, when Doctor Who was revived, and BBC, we'll have Doctor Who and have the Daleks. The Terry Nation, not Dicks, sorry, Terry Nation. A family turns around and says, yeah, great, how much are you going to pay? Beck never gets the opportunity, like Galton and Simpson. They didn't want to be screwed over. They copyrighted their idea. Beck is not in position. It was a one-off commission. It's a beautiful thing. The problem is you now need 2 maps to show all the London railway system, suburban system. In integrated transport terms, that doesn't work. So, the other problem with the map at the moment, it's, as I say, fetishized design. If it's not doing what it's meant to do, it might look pretty. People say it's Mondrian. No, it's not. He was electrical wiring diagrams. That's what he got the idea from. A wiring diagram. It's not Mondrian. It is a masterpiece of the truth. It actually came from very mundane.
It's a schematic.
It's a schematic. But to claim it into something it isn't, and that was what the latest moquettes, most of the moquette designs for the Underground, you would need to look at the Bauhaus. They're almost identical. And I would argue London Transport, it's because the collections have survived intact. There's been a lot of writing on it, but they're not unique. What they are is I think they're done better than most, and a lot better. Look at Southern Railway architecture, for stations for the Southern Electric, like Surbiton. They're lovely stations. They may not have the exact interiors, may not have the exact attention to detail of Charles Holden with the magnificent roundels, the one you're seeing now with Southgate. I mean, if you ever had, just go and have a look at Southgate Station. It's gorgeous. Wonderful building. Absolute. But modernism in a digestible English way. It's not going to, what's that? There's no brutalism. This is not Le Corbusier. This is Walter Gropius, but made for British taste, a little bit more reserved.
So we've only got 10 minutes left, and I really want to ask you about the use of the Underground. This is a bit of a segue, but the use of the Underground in the World Wars. You mentioned it right at the beginning, the fact that they actually used the tunnels as shelters in the First and Second World War, which I wasn't aware of. So, the First World War, this isn't a public system. This is private.
No, it's privately operated.
So who
Yes,
comes up with the
absolutely.
idea? How does that come about?
Philippa, the first Zeppelin raid in London is the 31st of May 1915. This is the horrors of aerial bombardment are brought upon London for the first time. And where particularly places like Liverpool Street, the East End, when the bombers come over, I think the first bombs hit actually near places like Clapton, and a couple are killed, are blown out of their boat. Nobody's seen, what the hell is that going over? It's like an enormous cigar. I mean, really scary. Think about that. You've never seen anything like this. And the searchlight desperately trying, what is that? And then suddenly bombs going off. So that's the first Zeppelin raid, first 1915. And the London East Enders and people around them go to the underground. They don't go to the cut and cover. That's not deep enough. They go to the Central London Railway, particularly at Liverpool Street. And Liverpool's at this point, the Central Line does not go any further east than Liverpool Street till 1940s, late mid 1940s. And they staff the London Electric Rail, or the Underground Electric Railways of London, open the gates and even put posters up saying, if you need to take shelter, you can even please bring a mattress with you. Oh, you can bring your pets with you if you want. Come down and stay on the platforms. Now, if you go to the Imperial War Museum, you're going to see a painting, I think it's Eric Kennington, or Nivenson, of shelter at Elephant and Castle. And it's not the Second World War, it's the First World War. And it's factory workers, women, female factories, amazing image. It said, go online and look at shelters at Elephant and Castle. And it's women, munitions workers in their nut brown smocks. And they're all staying on the platforms. Quite a striking thing. The Metropolitan Police help organise it. When an air raid happens, Boy Scouts with rattles would go around saying there's an air raid on its way. And a lot of the systems which we will later use for civil defence in London during the Second World War are actually developed during the first. The next big raid is the first of the Gotha. 4 Gotha bombers come over on the 13th of June, the first Gotha raid, and it hits Liverpool Street. And a bus is blown up, people killed. And in fact, if you go outside Liverpool Street Station now, to this day, you can see the shrapnel marks where the bombs hit. And it's not a Second World War bomb, it's a First World War. Again, people trekked to the underground. Now, that memory of using the underground as a shelter is going to endure. It's a collective memory. Oh, yeah, we went to the underground over the war. Do you remember that? We had a sing-song. It was a bit smelly. We brought some food, but we could bring the cat with us. Right.
Must have been carnage.
Actually kind of worked.
Cats and dogs.
But the thing is also what the Metropolitan Police would do was they would say if a perhaps station was getting too busy, they would put people on the train and say, right, move up to the next station, and then spread out on the platforms. But people are sleeping in the spiral staircase and stuff. There aren't many escalators yet on the underground, but they're actually sleeping on the escalators. And they will sleep up to a white line on the platform whilst the trains are still running. Then after the trains have stopped running, then you could spread armistice comes, all the debris, the canteens, the signs, comes shelter here, all taken down. It's forgotten about. Well, yes and no. Okay, so first, we're getting into the war now. During the interwar period, the concept of the bomber will always get through is so important if you're going to understand tube sheltering and why it's significant and important. The concept of nuclear warfare, the programme threads about a devastating blow which wipes out civilization. Well, again, you need to go onto the internet. I want people to go and have a look at the state of things to come. G. Wells, and it's a film, 1937, and it shows London being devastated by a bombing raid. Buses are blown up. Shape of Things to Come. Sorry. Blown up, a bomb and gas attacks, and people crowding into the underground and panicking and screaming. It's actually very disturbing to watch into this day. And the fear was the bomber will always get through. There could be, like a nuclear war, there could be no defensives. Harold Macmillan talks about, spoke of mass bombing like we now speak of a nuclear war. And that was why a lot of people are saying we have to have, we're trying to disarm and stuff. Of course, the other fear is this. If the bombing happens, and the concept of mass bombing, which later on Bomber Harris will actually carry on, is based on an explicit class consciousness. It's what we almost like a white Marxist version. What it's saying is, if you drop loads of bombs on the working class areas of London, they'll break. They won't do their work. They won't fight. They won't get up. You'll so devastate it, they won't work. And we try it again when we're bombing in Germany. The idea is break the morale of the working classes. If you could do that, well, that's the concept of mass bombing. A knockout blow so devastating that people cease to function. And the fear is, right, if you have, though they might have sheltered in the underground of the First World War, if they shelter in the second, if there's a coming war, they won't come back up. They'll become troglodytes. And you'll never get them back up. And also, in a devastated London, the devastated London shown in the Quarter film, The Shape of Things to Come, the underground might just be the only operating transport system in the capital at the time, which you might need to use to transport troops around to put down rioting or whatever, because in a devastated capital. This could be a devastated capital which has got gas on it, or worse, the toxins. So the underground might be the only form of functioning underground for troops. So anyway, the fear of what becomes known as the deep shelter mentality means that because of the fear of the bomber, you can't use the tube. And it's made the decision is from the Committee of Imperial Defence in 1929, say tube, we might need them, are unsuitable. And then in 1937, Frank Pick is asked, and Ashfield asked him, will you have a look from the Home Office and what will become the Ministry of Home Defence? When you look at it and transport, and they come to the conclusion, no. Also, there's a very important thing. A lot of the so-called deep tube stations, lines which they built, deep stations, actually aren't that deep. A classic example, I'll give you the list because it's going to be important later. Bounds Green, Bank, parts of it, and Balham. All those stations are just beneath the surface because they're coming up to, they're not actually that deep. They're still in tube tunnels, but they're not that deep. Now, that's very, remember those three station names. And they come to the conclusion, the problem would be we would be very difficult to operate a service and people won't come back up. Now, the problem with that is it's based on the concept of the total knockout blow. If by 1937, got a few developments. One, the bomber may not always get through with fast monoplane aluminium fighter planes, the Spitfire and the Hurricane, well, that other miracle, radar. So there is a possibility you might be intercept them. Now, for the majority of Londoners to give a degree of shelter, it's evacuation. That's why Frank Pick, again, disgraceful, I would argue, one of Frank Pick's most important contributions to London and the civilization and the people of London is the evacuation scheme. I barely gets a mention because we're all obsessing about the uplighters and the mock air. That's a disgrace. But getting on, Finsbury Borough up in North London, which is basically not far from Holborn, it's not Finsbury Park, build a shelter using tunnels rings, like a tube tunnel. And they say, because if there's going to be a war, by 1937, it's like, look, they've got a hot war in Spain. It looks like it's coming. And they build a shelter. And the government says, no, we can, we will have brick shelters on the surface. And under no circumstances is the underground to be used as a shelter because it's needed. So they build a tube tunnel themselves, so a tunnel with rings. And it's called the Finsbury scheme. And of course, other people are saying, why aren't you preparing? Can you protect, particularly the poorest in society? And so there is an it becomes very political. So 1939, 38, they have a dry run with Munich. Posters are put up. The underground is not, the stations are not to be used for sheltering. I'm pointing you to the local surface shelter. And that's all very going well. You're not allowed to shelter, can't go down there. Sunday, the 8th of September, 1940. Particularly, London is being hit by the Luftwaffe. We bombed Berlin. Hitler said in reply, he's taking the bombers off the airfields, thank God, and heads for London, even though they've only got about 10 minutes over, particularly. But anyway, London gets the East End's getting hammering. And it's a Sunday, the 8th of September, 1940. And do you remember I was talking about the memory of sheltering in the First World War? Well, loads of East Enders trek up from there, and they know they can see down places like Silvertown are burning, and they can smell the smoke, and they know this is coming. And they force open the gates, go down and sit down. The staff are pushed aside. You've got to come up. And then the police come in. And we're not moving. Well, you're going to not get out of that. Right. And it's going on that Sunday, 8th of September, it's going around London. There's a similar incident happens at Highgate, now the one at Hampstead. And people have said, well, screw this. We're not going to die. We're not going to burn. Here's another problem. What the hell are you going to do? There's a lovely situation. I use mass observation, which is a wonderful archive, Sussex University, where they went round often and wrote down what people thought. And a lot of this is all being relayed to the Ministry of Information because there's this fear that the working classes of London will not get off the tunnels and come and go and do a day's work. Ministry of Information, based in Senate House, which is designed by Charles Holden, who did the tube station, where Frank Pick is in charge, briefly, is very important at this point, is finding out what people are thinking. And so they go and start asking them questions. What do you think about this? And a lot of them said, oh, well, no, me dad did that in the First World War. So now I'm coming down here. Do you like it? No, it's horrible. What are you going to do? It's another problem. There's a lovely case using mass observation files. There was a woman, husband is in the forces in the Navy, and she's got a large family, got a couple of twins. And what they're doing, they're going to Holland Park Station when the bombing starts, and they buy a ticket for the kids and her, and they travel up and down on the trains. Right. They're sheltering. So are you going to kick them out? And that's the problem. The authorities have been seen to fail to provide adequate shelter for its populace, for the ordinary people of London. And who are the two political organisations? This is a period of particular where political extremism on both sides, be it the Communist Party of Great Britain or the British Union of Fascists, although a lot of them have been interned, there's an awful lot of BUF members still around in the East End. Who is going to own the underground, organise it? Is it going to be the government or is it going to be them? And that's the problem. So you have the situation where Mickey Davis, unfortunately the title, given the lack of sensitivity of it, Mickey the Midget, is a brilliant, got to be fair, organiser. And he takes over a shelter in London. And he organises it properly, classic communist organisation. Cleans up, gets latrines in. The underground stations, there's no toilets, criminal fraternity, because the gates are open. There's no ticketing, there's not enough people crushing. There's no toilets, there's fights. It's not very nice. And of course, the communists and the BUF are exploiting the political situation. So, for example, whilst the underground is being taken over, what were not known as shelters, they're called squatters at this point, squatters who are on the underground. A similar march led by the Communist Party of Great Britain descends on the Savoy on the 15th of September. And the idea is they demand that they be given shelter in the rich people's shelter, and the Savoy are no bloody fools. What do? Let them in. And if they can have anything they want, as long as they pay. And there they thought, oh, no, this is it. Oh, no, more than what. If they had have given them what they wanted, which was, yeah, we got them. Now, is the underground going to do the same? Because ultimately, you've got to ask yourself a question here, Philippa. Are you prepared, ultimately, to put soldiers down there with bayonet and throw women and children out in the middle of an air raid? What would Goebbels make of that in propaganda terms?
Awesome. A civil war kicking off in the capital.
Exactly. So Lord Ashfield with John Anderson, as in the Anderson shelter, who were tour. And by the way, right up till Churchill, under no circumstances will we have sheltering. It must not happen. But the brilliance of Churchill I'm going to tell you about in a second. Anderson and John and Ashfield take them round and they go to Holborn and they look at the situation and they say, well, we can't throw them out now, can we? So a new Home Secretary under Herbert Morrison, who set up, is given the job of organising it. And London Transport, who had been told for 20 years it's not to happen, are suddenly told, right, you've got to organise it. And they go, oh, thanks. Yeah, all right, we'll do it. And because it's a good organisation, structurally well run, well managed, they do a magnificent job. So you have the situation from what would have been a negative, where you've got the criminal fraternity. You've got spivs saying, "We'll buy you a spot. We'll buy you a place on the platform. You pay them a crown, they'll get you a spot on the platform." Loads, and those children who remained in London are all playing truant and playing around on the underground. During the day, they're disappearing together. There are no toilets. There's no hot fluids. There's no proper bedding there. And here's a genuine fear, and this is not messing about. There is a fear that bubonic plague or worse could spread. There is an epidemic because of the number of people down there. Is an epidemic of mice, rats using the place. The places stink. And here's the most unpleasant one: mosquitoes. And they have been dining out on thousands of people sleeping overnight. And so bad is the problem that the London School of Tropical Medicine is contacted to come up, how are we going to deal with this? Because the fear is, if they can put these blood-sucking mosquitoes, they've actually adapted, they've evolved slightly different between the Bakerloo and the Piccadilly line. They're actually evolving to live in these conditions, like tube mice have evolved to the conditions. Anyway, so they contact university and they come, right, what you need to do is the following. Lord Horder, who was Lord Ashfield's personal physician, is contacted to come up with a scheme for health. The Ministry of Food is brought in to get food. And the deal is you bring your own cup with you and they will feed you. And entertainment is put on. And it's a lovely, typical Ashfield. Ashfield, from his own pocket, and Lord Mayor, pay for a Christmas present for every child staying on the platforms in 1940. They put Christmas trees up. If you go on the internet, you'll see, I tear up when I think about it. They're all asleep on the platforms and they go down and you can see the camera. People trying to get a bit of sleep, terrified, but finding, as most observation, woman says, why are you here? I feel safe. And I know it's not ideal. I feel safe. And you could get about 4 hours sleep. Not everybody likes the shelterers. They often think they're dirty. I'm afraid anti-Semitism will always raise its ugly head. And the BUF, that a horrible situation they've taken over the station at Mornington Crescent. And they are threatening, there's a Greek Cypriot community and a Jewish community around there. And they're threatening, they're telling them, going up to them, don't you worry, wait till Hitler comes and then we'll deal with you. So, in other words, if you don't take this and own it,
someone else will.
But here's the other thing. Who's watching, do you think, Philippa, what's going on the tube? Who do you think is watching from afar? Obviously, Joseph Goebbels is interested. Which other country is very interested to see how we're coping? America.
Right.
United States. The United States. Right. Harry Hopkins, who is Franklin Delano Roosevelt's personal representative, is sent over to see, will London take it? Bear in mind, we just had the Munich Agreement where we basically sold Czechoslovakia. After Dunkirk, not unreasonably, the Americans are asking a simple question, are the British going to fight on or chuck it in and do a deal with Hitler? And in fact, Churchill, when he becomes, I have nothing to offer you but blood, sweat, or toil and tears, is a minority within his cabinet. People like Lord Halifax and Rab Butler have been having clandestine contacts via the Swedish with Goering to do a deal. And it's actually the Labour ministers who come in, who know they'll be the first ones to be shot, Attlee and Bevan. Churchill is in a minority in his own cabinet in May 1940. And what the Americans want to know, what is the point in sending them ships and arms if they're going to chuck in the towel? So they sent Harry Hopkins over. There are FBI agents looking around London at this point secretly to see what's morale. So what do? The underground is getting into its stride. There are medical centres. A welfare state is emerging down there. There's even libraries for people. Here's a lovely thing. Aldwych Tube Station is unique amongst all the sheltering stations. It's run by Westminster Council. The Aldwych branch, which is now closed, was closed during the war. And they stored things from the British Museum down there, artworks. They'll get elder marbles go down there during the war to give them protection. But the lovely thing about the Aldwych branch is, if you stop the service, nobody can get into that state. Nobody can get off the train and just stay there. In other words, you can control access to Aldwych Tube Station because there's no trains running. And it becomes what I would say this sanctified, atypical official tube station. That is where you show your diplomats, you show your American film crews how happy, the jolly, we can take it, giving two fingers up to Hitler. And all that, London can take it. And Wendell Willkie, who had been the Republican candidate against FDR in 1940, is sent over to go. And where do they take him? They take him to Aldwych. And he says, London can take it. Look at these happy cockneys in there. And it's all great and so on and so forth. But here's the thing. George Formby plays the Aldwych. And I do not mean the Aldwych Theatre. I mean Aldwych Tube Station. In November 1923. It's called Somewhere in London. You can go online, see George Formby playing. He's happy. He's the most popular entertainer in Britain at the time. And saying, oh, you're happy down here. And, isn't it great to be down here? And don't joke. And there's Admiral Evans of the Nore, who's the man in charge of civil defence. He's standing there. I'd like to introduce you to our cheerful man, George Formby. Go on, George. Give us a song. And they're all playing, and there he is, God bless him, playing in the pit on the tracks at Aldwych, with people very happy to see him. So anyway, all this, you then send down. Henry Moore is sent down, the great, to do sketches. Cecil Beaton, instead of just taking pictures of the latest fashion models for the season, decides to do his bit, and he goes down. He sends down and does the most magnificent, again very moving pictures of shelterers on the platforms. And if you go to the Imperial War Museum site, you'll see them. And they're Cecil Beaton. And what they're doing? All these pictures are being put in a diplomatic bag to show the underground, and they're being sent to the White House for Franklin Delano Roosevelt to look at. And he's saying, what are we saying there? We can take it. And the underground is playing its part. And bear in mind, during this period, the underground staff are having to keep an underground going in the midst of air raids. They'll have to do it again with V weapons, later now. 423 London transport staff are killed and 3,000 injured on duty. keeping the railway, keeping the wheels running.
Mm.
Quite a death toll.
Yeah.
If you want a vignette of wartime London, you think about the tube. You see that picture. There are certain ones, of evacuees with the labels on them, poor little souls with their bags going off to the West Country. If you think of the Underground, the sixth symbol would be St. Paul, with the bombing next to the smoke, but St. Paul's proudly, determinedly still standing against tyranny and evil. And the tube, from a negative, what had been a disaster in many ways, and politically a powder keg, because it is true the communists have got a good point. The government has not provided safety for the populace, and they're banged to rights. But quickly, London Transport Minister Herbert Morrison is brilliant, absolutely brilliant spirit. And Lord Ashfield, they work together again, they know each other, and they take from chaos and disorder and potentially a political explosion here, and they turn it into a positive. And it becomes a defining image of the Second World War of resistance against the enemy. Now, here's something which shows you why it's important to always look at the political element there. It's perhaps I'm going to surprise you here, Philippa. Far more people shelter on the Underground of the First World War than in the Second.
All right.
And it's a smaller system. But only 14%. It's 200,000, according to a Metropolitan police count in 1918 during a Gotha raid. That's the maximum, 200,000. The biggest number, I think it's 15th of September, is 177,000. Now, when the Blitz knocks off, the numbers decline. We have a mini Blitz in 1942, then people go back down to the tube, and also the V weapons. In 1945 on VE Day, there are still 12 people sleeping down at Aldwych. The GIs used to go when they come over, getting ready for D-Day, occasion because you've got the Rainbow Club where the GIs love the Underground. They're given a free map of the Underground by the Red Cross, American Red Cross. There's the Rainbow Club where you can go and have donuts and coffee and Coke and get to know the Underground. Go and see Britain. It's got things. And London's got museums and things. So GIs start staying out. Now, do you remember those three stations I mentioned, which were Balham, Bank and Bounds Green? Well, do you remember I said Pick weren't just being unpleasant and just being awkward? All those three stations are where there are terrible disasters because bombs pierce the tunnels, particularly Balham. Now, Balham is genuinely horrific. What happens in November 1940, a bomb pierces the tunnel and it breaches gas and water mains. So the passengers, torrent of water and gas and soil rushes into the platforms. I think it's 79 people are killed. And you see the photographs. It is quite horrific to see the whole of the tunnels covered up to the top. Bank, this, by the way, nearly falls into the crater. That's at Bank. At Bank, now the bomb kills people. And then at Bounds Green, Belgian refugees who are sheltering. Again, the tunnel is not just below the surface because it's coming up to the surface into the open. Is hit by a bomber, a hit and run bomber hits the tunnels and kills a load of Belgian refugees. There are plaques up at these stations. Bear in mind that figure. Significantly more people using it in the First World War. But because it's a political powder keg, where the extremes of British politics, bear in mind at this point that both the fascists and the communists are basically technically allied with the enemy. This is prior to Barbarossa. This is Nazi-Soviet pact time. If you don't control it, if you're not quick on your feet and adapt policy to the circumstances, you're going to be in real trouble. This could have exploded. 14% only using it, but politically a powder keg. Here's the thing. Churchill, for all his duty, does it about phrase a turnaround in policy, and he does it literally in a day and says, okay, tell me how you organise this. Because Anderson has gone around, Anderson and Ashfield have gone around. Anderson reports back to Churchill and he says, okay, we've got to do it. And he says, right, tell me about it. Let's do it. But the problem is, in certain cases, the Underground, instead of being a shelter, became a death trap. And of course, then we get on to the awful events at Bethnal Green. Bethnal Green had not opened as a tube station. It was on the 3rd of March, 1943. It's the worst civilian disaster of the war. It's 173 people killed, mostly women and children. They only found 4 people broken bones. They asphyxiated. What happened was there was a crush. It's a complete Gordian knot of bureaucratic incompetence. Also, there are some issues of behaviour in that shelter, as a result of which the authorities are less inclined to help sort things out. Edwina Batten has only been down there about 2 months earlier for an official, so it all looked fine when it wasn't. And London Transport is a Gordian knot, some issues of behaviour as well. And it's difficult, very difficult, the ambulance to get in there. It's an absolutely horrific thing, and rightly so. Traumatised people, a generation, and a very fine memorial has been put up from Stairway to Heaven. It's now outside Bethnal Green. I'm probably the first person to look at all the Bethnal Green papers. I can understand now, looking back, why they kept it back, because it's the height of just before D-Day. Again, the next night, radio, we had hit Berlin the night before the crash. People expecting, rather like in the Baedeker raids, they're expecting the Germans to come over. And so there's fear. It's fear of the enemy causes what is a civilian disaster. And here's again, lack of joined up thinking. They're testing new guns in Victoria Park, and they haven't told anybody. So a bomb.
So people think they're coming because their guns are going off.
It's a situation. London Transport, although it's not, the station isn't open. 5,000 people on average can stay down there. It should never really open, but there's pressure on the authorities to be seen to do something. In the case of Bounds Green is completely unsuitable as a shelter. It might look underground, but it really isn't that far from the underground. Bethnal Green has not got an adequate entrance. It's badly illuminated. It doesn't have a handrail down the centre. And for some ridiculous reason, the authorities are not sorting it. Bung in some other very unpleasant reason, and I understand why they kept it back. When people are asked why it had happened, people say pushing and pulling Jews. It's anti-Semitism is the elephant in the room with regard to Bethnal Green. And it's fascinating. There is an emergency meeting convened at Stepney Council the very next morning. And there are some of the shelter ones, no, it's Jews. Jews, definitely Jews. They check.
Scapegoating.
They said they check, and they also find out that no Jewish people were involved in it. Nasty anti-Semitism. So that is why they hold back. But let's not end on a sad moment there. Tube sheltering actually is to take a negative and turn it into positive, fundamentally. And I said, just think of the children having their Christmas down at the Tube. And it has been very, or if you want to see something truly beautiful, Henry Moore's sketches. George Formby going down, not being paid. I'll do them a song. I'll do them a show. Glenn Miller, of all people, ends up at Marble Arch when he going to do a show for people to shelter. He's been caught in an air raid in 1940, and he goes down and says, "Okay, well, have you got your instruments, gents? Let's do them." So People's one of the last shows he ever did. So that's that's the reality behind tube sheltering. It's quite as simple as people think, I would say.
No, that's so interesting. I think people will find that fascinating. And the fact that you can, you're using the stations that were used for that now. If you're on the tube, this is what people love about traveling when they're interested in history, is that you're the only thing that's separating you is time. You're in the same spaces. And with the tube, you're seeing the same things a lot of the time as well, the same signage and whatever.
Beautiful. That's why when they started ripping the stuff out in the 80s, thank God for the 20th Century Society said, "What are you doing?"
Yes, stop.
I gave a talk to the 20th Century Society, and I did a bit of digging, and it's not a good moment. They should be ashamed of themselves what they did. I mean, look, there was a whole black market, and they still turn up, and I don't care the auction now. We all know where you got it from.
Yeah.
And it's disgusting. I saw in a antiques place somewhere in West London, Arnos Grove, Roundel. Arnos Grove, the famous great listed station. Disgusting. And the most disgusting thing was that they were often doing it for the value of the metal. I mean, that.
Yeah. So scrapped. It wasn't even. Yeah.
Transport for London and London, thank goodness, have now got a heritage officer, does a fantastic job. So look at the roundel we have there, just behind me now, the Southgate. That is with the brown. But did you know how beautifully made they are? There's a bronze frame there, solid bronze. That is Johnson lettering. It's been cleaned up, and they're just magnificent. They're beautiful pieces of art. They're pieces of art in themselves. And look at Man Ray. If you have a joy, have a look at Man Ray's poster, London Transport Keeps London Going. The London Transport roundel with Saturn, planet Saturn moon with its rings, because the rings of Saturn had just been discovered.
Right.
So there's each and every one at the moment. And the underground keeps going. It'll always have the issue. We've got the famous battle between Ken Livingstone and Mrs. T over Fair's Fair. Bear in mind, under travel, because of post-war. The underground from 1955 enters what we describe as what is delightfully described as managed decline. The idea post-war, we're all going to be driving cars, and there was this extraordinary ring road scheme, 5 rings for motorways, and some of it's built, the Westway in West London or the Park Lane, now the motorway. People won't need to travel by underground. The other thing is, and it's very important, this, television. 1955, nobody's watching really the BBC because it's far too, and now an interesting programme on bluebells in Gloucestershire. Then ITV turn up and rediffusion, London, and they've got programmes like 77, Sunset Strip, Boy, rock and roll they're showing, all this dangerous stuff. And Sunday night at the London Palladium with Tommy Trinder. People start watching television and they're wiping the floor, ITV, armchair theatre, all
So I
this
think
stuff.
people aren't going to coming out.
And guess what? It means people aren't using the tube. So the motorway system. And then people say, I do not want to see Covent Garden levelled. We've got to come up with a solution. Just about, and due to the efforts of a wonderful underwriter, again, a name you know, Sir John Elliott, against the flow of tide, this is when the Ministry of Transport is about to butcher the railways of the country through Dr. Beeching. They get the Victoria Line built, and the Victoria Line is state of the art. It's automatic. It's got safety. The trains are automatic. They're state of the art. It's got Misha Black is going to design the stations and the looks of the trains. State of the art technology, a completely automatic underground. The signalling, the trains, it's brilliant. Totally headed roll, copied around the world, just like all London transport and London Underground stuff goes around the world because we were the people who were the oldest tube in the world, the underground of the world. And you can see a generation of people have gone out, rather like Francis Drake or Sir Walter Raleigh's, to the other nations of the world. We go back to America now. They gave us mass transit at the turn of the century. We now go back. A wonderful man, Andy Byford, who I've had the privilege of talking to. He was the Commissioner for Transport for London. His original job was to sort out the New York subway and Toronto's. He's now working with Amtrak. He started with the underground. A whole generation of brilliant staff and managers and organisers and planners. That's what Ashfield and Pick. They can spot good people and they get the Victoria Line. But by 1976, the number of people using the underground has hit an absolute low of 548 million only. That's the lowest point in post-war usage. But here's the good news. After the King's Cross fire, where people have cut too fast and too quick, and there are plenty of warnings this is coming, out of bad. Unfortunately, in this country, you have to kill somebody before you change things. You could say that with the Bradford fire, you could say that with Hillsborough, you could say it with the Marchioness disaster, Piper Alpha, Grenfell Tower. Well, King's Cross fire.
You have to technically kill 3 people on a road junction before you change. Before they change the road junction.
It's true. Yeah. And the King's Cross fire, which is it's predictable. They've been using during the war. Shelterers had smoked on the when we were sleeping on the escalators, had smoked, and the escalators of the MH escalators are called MH are made out of wood. So underneath, you see there were plenty of kindling. They've got, and you can see the burn marks from the cigarettes. So it's not like there's a serious fire at Gooch Street. There's another serious fire at Oxford Circus. How people weren't killed at Oxford Circus? Because a lot of the mouldings is plastic. And what they haven't been doing is taking the layers of paint off. But all hell breaks loose. You get the fireball. Lots of people saying, oh, it wasn't alcohol. But out of bad, the Fennel report comes in, and it's a kicking to the underground. This was preventable. And a brilliant leader, I know the word for him, I again had the privilege of interview, Dennis Tunniscliffe. Again, you need a name people won't have heard. He turns around at 55 Broadway to memory and says, we're in denial, gentlemen. We've just killed 32 1 people. This is never to happen again. But he can also, in the situation, he can go to the Conservative Thatcher government and say, right, now you're going to have to give us some money. And then, because they know that the electoral effects, basically, of having people burnt alive in the underground, it's not a vote winner. Also, Ken Dodds, the MP for King's Cross in St Pancras, does a speech in the House of Commons, which is absolutely, it's moving and it's full of fury. That this was warned, you could have done something about this. So finally, the money starts turning up. Tunniscliffe has a root and branch, right, resting on your laurels. We're not all Frank Pick and Ashfield anymore. We've got to do better than this. And from that, he takes the underground, which is a crushed organisation, dusts it off, right, we're going to do better. He then, even through clever persuasion, gets the Jubilee Line extension built. And then you had Tony Blair can get to the Millennium Dome, just like Gladstone had invested in the Metropolitan District Railway. Gladstone's last journey ever is on the District Railway. He goes by, when when he dies, his last journey is by the Underground. Well, Tony Blair, he not his last journey, but gets wide the Jubilee line. But Gladstone's last journey, I'm just finished us off on this. He had been to in 1862. He travelled on a trial trip, and he buys shares in the Metropolitan District Railway, the competitor, and he supports the district against the Metropolitan. And the district, James Statsfield, very happy to have support, and he keeps buying shares, and so does his son Herbert. So anyway, he dies, and he's up in North Wales, and a special train is put on for this great figure of politics, and the railway company, London North Western, take him down to Willesden Junction. And then it goes round to Earl's Court, because you used to be able to go, because there was once upon a time an outer, a middle, and an inner circle. We've only got the inner circle, though London Overground is doing a very similar thing these days. And his hearse in his car. And it's taken down to Earl's Court. And at each of the stations, there are people, this is at night, waiting to see the train go through. And then at Earl's Court, a district railway steam locomotive couples onto the hearse car and pulls the train to Westminster. He's taken through, because the Parliament, the MPs used to have their own private entrance to the Underground, Westminster Station. And he's taken through those wonderful formal gates with District Railway on it, Metropolitan District. And his coffin is taken off the train and laid to rest in Westminster Hall. So Gladstone's last trip is by the tube, Underground, if you like. But one of the great things, we have the Elizabeth line, which is doing something. Do you remember I was saying that the Underground was always part of a bigger system? What the Underground, everything comes in full circle. If the Victorians saw our problems and we went back to their time and they go, yeah, you're having trouble financing it. Yeah. You know, have you got problems, NIMBYs? Oh, yeah. Nothing changes. The Elizabeth line now links on either side the railways of out to Shenfield, out from Liverpool Street, all the way out to Reading. Well, the Great Western used to run a through service over the original Underground from Farringdon. Guess where to? Windsor, Reading. What the Elizabeth line is doing, again, the first Elizabeth line is planned, or an idea a bit like it, is planned in 1893, according to Douglas Oakervey, the expert tunneler who I had the privilege of interviewing. He's done research. Then 1919, Frank Pitt comes up with a scheme for bigger tubes, express tubes. And then again and again, post-war it comes up again, 1949, 1989. Looks like it's going to happen. Rail privatisation comes up, so that wrecks that. And then finally, it goes ahead. And George Osborne and Lord Adonis fund it initially. George Osborne finds the money. And it opens late. It's opened about 100 years late. But when you're in London, how the hell do we live without it? It's taken it's again like a bypass operation for the Underground. It has taken a lot of the pressure off the Central Line, which has been struggling. A lot of people say, well, what about the rest of the Underground? And absolutely right. What is happening in Birmingham, Manchester, they're only doing what we got right in 1933. Manchester now has a transport for Manchester. Wales has a transport for Wales. And what they want to do is integrate the buses with their trains. It's not rocket science. We got it right. The rest of the world copied it. Some people tried to dismantle it with New Labour and with privatisation, which was a disaster. They were told by Tunniscliffe it's not going to work, but they went ahead with it anyway. And I think Herbert Morrison, who was Labour, wouldn't have been best pleased with it. The concept, the ideas, the technology. Yes, the Underground will always change. Elizabeth Line is wonderful. Andy Byford, a wonderful interview, which I got, of trying to get it open and get it to him so they knew that so that Queen Elizabeth could see it. And they didn't know to the last minute, he was telling me. Literally, he had 2 plaques up. Yes, she's coming. At which point they had to quickly unscrew the plaque. She's here. And then Andy Byford had the pleasure of taking around Her Late Majesty round. Think of Gladstone. It's a lovely story. It's so many different areas, but always bear in mind that the Underground is about people, from Charles Pearson right through to the wonderful Ashfield. I'll tell you one last story before you go. Lord Ashfield has a very naughty sense of humour. He's fun. He can talk to ladies' man, had an affair with Diana Cooper, as in Duff Cooper's wife, a society beauty. But a baby is born on the Bakerloo line about 1924. And the mother, who I think she's a single mother by the sound of things, that's disgraceful, writes to Lord Ashfield and says, would you be prepared to be a godfather to my daughter? And being Ashfield, she gets a handwritten letter. My dear, yes, but I missed something. I don't normally make a habit of this, so please don't tell other people that I will be. But I would be honoured to be your godfather to your daughter. How is your daughter doing? And he said, may I make a suggestion for a name? How about Toulouse Ursula Beatrice Eunice, or Tube? And that is classic. There's a wonderful Punch cartoon from about 1937. It's got the famous Epstein picture of statue Knight from 55 Broadway, which is quite an extraordinary image. Again, London Transport's trying things which other people, the latest in modern art and so forth, and it's quite a statue. And there's Ashfield with a top hat on, with his feet up, pair of spats, and his golf clubs over his shoulder. If you want to, I mean, the Alexandra Jan, this is where I would argue in underground history hasn't been done very well. It hasn't had the economic rigor. It needed to go back to where it starts. And it's only now that we're going to have a really good biography from Alexandra Jan on Lord Ashfield. It's about 70 years overdue, because we've been seeing Pick, the wonderful Frank Pick, please don't get me wrong, in a vacuum. And within only a design context, there's so much more. Proof of that, the evacuation scheme for London. Now that's a gift. So anyway, look, love the underground. Travel, go up to Southgate, have a look at Southwark on the Jubilee Line extension. Magnificent station. Beautiful. Anyway, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for being part of it.
Brilliant. It's been a privilege.
That's been great. And thank you for giving me over 3 hours of your time. So hopefully people have really, really enjoyed. It's quite in-depth look at something that I suppose a lot of people just get on and get off and wouldn't think too much about. So it's been great. It's one of 4, is that right? That's what
It's one of the first one is called Underground Railway, Crowded City. And I cover the period from 1801, from Thames Tunnel up to the Central London Railway opening about 1902. And the Yanks are about to turn up. The second one is called Going Deeper. That's about that period, 1903 to Transport is Politics, 33 to 1987. It ends with King's Cross Fire. And then the last one is called After King's Cross, which from 1987, 88 to 2005. And by then, you'd probably be able to prop up a piano on all 4 legs.
Make them the same size in case anyone's,
I'll see what I could do. Okay. It's been lovely, Philippa. And
thank you so much, Niall.
Absolute privilege. You have a lovely day, whatever you're doing.
And you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.